Chapter 141. It was still a bar. Su-Lu pushed open the heavy glass door, and smelled the familiar scent of pine, nut wine, and the nuts that went with the wine. He couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that even though he was wanted by the Federation, Shi Qinghai was still reluctant to drink. From this point of view, this guy seemed to lack some of the good habits of a professional agent. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning. The streets near the sea were shrouded in the wind and snow of late winter. The bar opened earlier than usual in order to protect the drunkards who craved for a sip of hot wine in the cold winter. But at this time, business was still average and the bar was relatively quiet. At the innermost table facing the entrance of the bar, there was a young man wearing a light gray windbreaker. His hair was neatly combed, and he was sipping his drink with his head slightly lowered. After Su-Lu entered the bar, he saw the man at first glance. He was startled and didn't immediately go forward to greet him. Instead, he leaned on his crutch and slowly walked to a table not adjacent to each other. He ordered a glass of white gold. The man in the gray windbreaker quickly finished his drink. He seemed to be thinking about something. He gently knocked on the table 3 times, left the money for the drink, and walked to the back of the bar in an extremely inconspicuous manner. There's probably a back door there, Su-Lu thought in his heart. He lowered his head and looked at the white gold in the glass. He couldn't help but frown. This kind of S1 specialty, pure and high-quality white wine, was still very harsh to the throat after being paired with honeymelon juice. After drinking with Shi Qinghai countless times, he still found it difficult to adapt. After sitting for about 3 minutes, Su-Lu finally finished the transparent liquor in the glass. He painfully licked his lips, handed the money to the bartender, and asked for the location of the restroom. The bartender politely pointed the way, and Su-Lu walked to the back of the bar. "It's a pity that you're not a spy." Shi Qinghai's eyes calmly looked straight ahead on the road. This pair of peach blossom eyes that had charmed countless young women seemed a little tired at this moment. It seemed that these days of escaping had brought unprecedented pressure to this excellent spy of the anti-government army. Su-Lu forced a smile. He lowered the hat on his head and tightened the synthetic fur scarf around his neck. At this time, the black off-road car was quietly driving on the streets of Linhai State. The heating in the car was not turned on, so it was a little cold. "I got this car from Shangye. Now, I don't dare to refuel it casually, so I have to be a little more frugal," Shi Qinghai explained calmly with a cigarette in one hand and the steering wheel in the other. Su-Lu shrunk his body in the passenger seat. After a while, he said, "You just said that you are a spy planted by the anti-government forces in the government. The reason why your identity was exposed was because your superior was betrayed by a traitor within the anti-government army, which implicated you. The most important question is, the Federation government is now suspecting you of being the source of intelligence for the Linhai State Gymnasium assassination." Su-Lu exhaled a puff of smoke into his hand and looked at the road ahead in confusion. "It's too messy. It's really messy." Shi Qinghai stubbed out the cigarette and looked straight at the snowy road ahead. He said, "My teacher's superior died too quickly, so I didn't find out who the traitor in the organization was. I've been investigating these days and vaguely guessed something, but unfortunately, I don't have any evidence." "Why do you want me to be careful of Zhang Xiaoming?" Su-Lu stared at his side profile and asked. "The Federation Investigation Bureau has been investigating how Tai Ziyuan's whereabouts were leaked." Shi Qinghai's face showed a trace of a mocking smile. "After investigating so much, they could only find you. The Tai family seems to have too much confidence in their staff. Since Tai Ziyuan's whereabouts were leaked by you, you should know very well who you told when you were going to the concert the next day. The night before the New Year, I was drinking with you. You should have met with Zhang Xiaoming before that." Shi Qinghai frowned slightly. "I'm sure that I didn't tell anyone about this." Then, why was the National Defense Department's Eagle Faction's assassination attempt on the young master of the Tai family so timely and so accurate? There's only one explanation. The information was leaked by Zhang Xiaoming. I know she's a spy. Su Li's head was lowered. His right hand gently stroked his injured leg, which was a little painful from the cold. It was cold to the touch. It was as firm and cold as cement. She serves Senator Macklin. The black touring car smoothly stopped on the side of the road next to the Rose River. Shi Qinghai turned his head and looked at Su Lu beside him. He said in a serious tone, "You know that she's a spy. Don't you have any other thoughts?" "What thoughts can I have?" Su Lu leaned against the seat of the car. His eyes were calm as he looked ahead. He said in a lonely voice, "I only have 3 friends. 2 of them are spies, and 1 of them is a big shot. I'm a little numb to this kind of thing." He suddenly turned his head and stared into Shi Qinghai's eyes. He said very angrily, "Do I have a special trait that attracts spies?" Shi Qinghai smiled. He knew what he wanted to ask. He shrugged and said, "When I first met you, I didn't know that you were so lucky to know Taizun. I believe that Zhang Xiaoming is the same. The reason why both of us became friends with you is probably because you always have a trustworthy temperament." "Don't say such ridiculous things." Su Lu shook his head sadly. "Why do you want me to be careful of her?" "Zhang Xiaoming is just a very unprofessional girl," Shi Qinghai said. "The problem is that the people she serves are very professional people. Those people can use such an unprofessional girl to get what they want. My current situation is caused by them. And I'm afraid that you're also a thorn in their side. You think that Senator Medellin is a traitor in the anti-government army?" Su Lu looked at Shi Qinghai in surprise. Shi Qinghai smiled. His smile was full of uncertainty and self-mockery. "Didn't you see the recent news? It seems that this senator has already made connections with some forces in the Federation. Of course, no one will believe this inference of mine. Even the leader of Nanshui from Green Dragon Mountain and the citizens of the 4 states won't believe it. He was one of the most successful spies in the anti-government army. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but laugh at himself. When he had first thrown himself into this business, how could he have thought that he would be exposed in such a way? It seemed that it had been the same since ancient times. The enemy was always the cruelest inside. What are you going to do next? Go back to S2 directly to Green Dragon Mountain? Su Lu looked at Shi Qinghai worriedly and asked softly, "Since you've already been exposed, there's no way you can stay in the Federation anymore." His whole family had died tragically because of the Federation's government's numbness. His teacher and boss had died under that white beam of light because of the Federation's shady dealings. His friends had been arrested and imprisoned by the government under false pretenses. He didn't know where they were now. Su Lu didn't have a good impression of the government. So, whether it was Zhang Xiaoming's true identity or Shi Qinghai's true identity, he wasn't afraid or conflicted at all. He was just shocked. Shi Qinghai looked at him. Ever since the day the HDD director fell from the building and died tragically in front of him, he had been on the run. The Federation Investigation Bureau had been secretly looking for him. The past few days of escaping had been very exciting, but he didn't want to recall it at all. After arriving in Shangye, he had hidden for more than 10 days. He was supposed to take advantage of the relaxation of the secret search and go directly to Harbor City to find the last contact left for him by the organization. However, just before he left, Shi Qinghai used the back door he had left in the Federation Investigation Bureau's intranet to hack into the other party's network. When he was about to look for some information, he unexpectedly found that someone was investigating Su Lu. What made him even more alarmed was that the department investigating Su Lu had a very high level of confidentiality. They directly bypassed the field office's authorization and quietly read all the information about Su Lu in Linhai over the past year. If Shi Qinghai hadn't left a cute little program in the Linhai office's intranet, then no one in the Federation Investigation Bureau, including him, would have known that someone was investigating Su Lu. It was also because of this reason that Shi Qinghai took the risk to contact Su Lu. While on the run, any unnecessary contact or meeting could expose him to the government, but he still did it. There was no doubt that this choice required great courage. Just like how Su Lu didn't hesitate to return to Linhai after he found out about what happened to him. The friendship between two drinking buddies wasn't just about the wine. My single contact is dead. Now, it's very difficult for me to get in touch with the anti-government army in Green Dragon Mountain. Shi Qinghai said in a low voice, with my ability, as long as the Bureau of Proclamation doesn't care, the Federation's government department will have a hard time catching me. The key is, what are you going to do now? You said someone is investigating me? What's there to investigate? Su Li's eyebrows flew up again like flying knives as he asked in shock. The confidence in Shi Qinghai's words gave him great comfort. It seemed that he didn't need to change Mr. Shi's chip. But then, Shi Qinghai's serious warning made Su Lu think of a lot of terrible things. There weren't many government departments that could bypass the Investigation Bureau's authority, but it was obvious that the first charter could easily do this. I just wanted to remind you, but I didn't expect you to come back. Shi Qinghai stared at his face and said, don't underestimate Tai Yuan's power, and don't refuse his help for the sake of face. If there is a problem in the future, you have to contact him first. Su Lu was silent, but his heart was already frozen by the ice and snow outside the car window. If it was really the omnipotent central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation that had noticed him, then even the Tai family couldn't do anything to help. At this moment, Shi Qinghai, who had been using the corner of his eye to look at the rear-view screen, suddenly narrowed his eyes and stepped on the gas pedal to the maximum. The black car's wheels rolled up the ice and snow, and suddenly rushed forward. Shi Qinghai stared at the road calmly, and said to Su Lu, who was next to him, if you don't want that leg to be broken, put on your seatbelt. Motherf ****, who's been watching me all this time? Shi Qinghai cursed angrily as he looked at the wide street behind him through the rear-view screen. There were a few black cars that were chasing him at high speed. Those black cars were very familiar, they were the official cars of the Federation Investigation Bureau. Chapter 142. The Bureau of Proclamation only grants Level 5 access for 1 day. Inside the high-speed Federation Investigation Bureau car, a middle-aged official stared at the fleeing car with hawk-like eyes. The official pressed on his headset and listened carefully for a while. Then he turned to the small holographic screen on his wrist and issued an order to his subordinates. Find out who your target is. He is a vicious terrorist. He is an outstanding soldier who graduated from a military academy. He knows the arrest process of the Investigation Bureau better than you do. So, don't be arrogant. Before entering the city, you must stop the car in front. If the other party resists, you are allowed to open fire. After issuing the order, the middle-aged official cursed angrily. Those motherf ****curs of the Bureau of Proclamation, they only gave me 1 day of access, and it's only level 5. Don't they know how dangerous that kid surnamed Shi is? Su Li's face was a little pale. The scenery outside the car window was moving backward at a terrifying speed. The automatic heating and de-icing system of the highway had already been turned on. Otherwise, if they were moving at this speed on ice and snow, their black off-road vehicle would have flipped over and died before the cars behind them could catch up. Shi Qinghai's face didn't have the slightest trace of nervousness except for the slight worry in his eyes. He licked his dry lips lightly, but he seemed a little excited. Do you know how to drive? He stared at the high-speed cars on the rearview screen. No. Su Lu answered quickly without a trace of hesitation. He knew that in such a tense moment, any hesitation could lead to serious consequences. Do you dare to drive? Yes. This question and answer was wonderful and absurd. Probably only Su Lu and Shi Qinghai could come up with something like this. Su Lu didn't know why Shi Qinghai handed over the control of the car to him, but he could imagine that Shi Qinghai must need to free up his hands to deal with the black cars that were getting closer and closer. Shi Qinghai pulled on a rope that had been hanging beside the sun visor. With a loud crash, something in the back of the black off-road vehicle fell out. A large pile of rusty metal components fell on the road of Linhai State. The speed of these components made them heavy and dangerous as they flew everywhere on the road. The car at the front of the black motorcade was hit by an iron thallium that had just bounced off the ground. With a strange sound of metal cracking, the car bounced up from the ground and then rushed diagonally off the road, making a loud noise. The pursuing motorcade was hindered by these things on the road. After paying a heavy price of one car, Su Lu and Shi Qinghai's car pulled away from them. "Open fire!" The official's angry voice came from the convoy. The sharp sound of bullets whistling through the air suddenly cut across the road, startling countless pedestrians and birds in the forest. Taking advantage of this time, Shi Qinghai switched seats with Su Lu. He took out a long gun from the back seat and placed it at the back of the car. After a few shattering sounds, the glass of the back of the car was completely shattered. He narrowed his eyes and aimed at the pursuing cars. Calmly, even somewhat coldly, he began to pull the trigger. With a muffled bang, Shi Qinghai's shoulder shook. The front wheel of the car he had aimed at suddenly exploded. At high speed, the car lost control and crashed into the side of the road. The cold wind poured into the car, making it incomparably cold. Su Lu hid his body completely under the seat, avoiding the flying bullet. Although he had never driven a car before, when he was in Donglin, he had once followed Uncle Feng Yu to repair cars. He was very familiar with the driving system of a car. Moreover, for someone who could operate a mecha, driving a car was like playing with a toy. However, this toy was very dangerous. Su Lu focused all his attention on controlling the steering wheel and gears, avoiding the cars in front of him that had stopped because of the gunfight. He tried to increase the speed of the car as much as possible, trying to increase the distance between him and the pursuing cars behind. This was his first time driving a car, but his keen eyes and incomparably strong hand-eye coordination allowed him to control the car smoothly. He looked more like a racer. No, Su Li's racer driving was even crazier. Because there was a U-shaped turn ahead, he did not seem to have any intention of letting go of the accelerator to slow down. In the instant before the turn, his left foot stomped hard on the accelerator and his right hand pulled hard on the handbrake, causing this civilian black off-road vehicle to drift dangerously on the slippery surface of the road. Just as it was about to hit the cliff at the turn, he straightened the car and continued to move forward fiercely. From the moment they were preparing to enter the turn to the moment they exited the turn, Su Lu did not let go of the accelerator. The tachometer was maintained at 4,500 RPM. Cold sweat had already covered his forehead. The bullets that hit the car from time to time and the strong wind that rushed in through the cracks made Su Lu feel unprecedentedly nervous and excited. Amidst the sound of the bullets, he roared loudly at Shi Qinghai behind him, "Throw down more of those things that are blocking the road, or else we won't be able to shake them off." Shi Qinghai had been calmly maintaining his aiming posture. He rarely pulled the trigger, but every time he pulled the trigger, the pursuing cars of the Federation Investigation Bureau would be reduced by one car. Hearing Su Li's roar, he roared loudly in the wind. "Just now, it was like I was throwing an auxiliary fuel tank. I went to the junkyard last night. How much did you think it could hold? Bastard! It seems that we are going to die here today." Su Lu shouted loudly while nervously watching the situation on the road. His eyes and his hands were in perfect harmony at this moment. Everything he saw was organized into his mind in an extremely organized manner. Then, through the special channels in his body, the corresponding measures were transmitted to his three limbs. All the controls, without any unnecessary movements, without any hesitation, were extremely smooth, except for the foot that had been stepping on the accelerator all the time. Just like Su Lu, it was firm, unwavering, and determined not to move away. It was a perfect driving, a heroic driving, and a crazy driving. Although Shi Qinghai did not turn around, he knew how fast the car was going at this time. His face was slightly pale, and he shouted loudly, "Break into the city in front. In 3 minutes, the Investigation Bureau will set up the first line of interception." Su Li's face was also extremely pale. Looking at the countless scenes that were retreating at high speed, he felt that he had returned to that extremely terrifying black dream. He clenched his teeth, raised his right hand, and forcefully turned the steering wheel with his left hand. He secretly prayed that the car would not overturn. When the Federation Investigation Bureau's team that was secretly pursuing Shi Qinghai arrived at the 7th toll station of Linhai, the number of cars had increased from 9 to 5. The middle-aged official with a particularly gloomy face got out of the car and looked at the broken railing in front of him. He looked back at his subordinates behind him and squeezed out a voice from between his teeth. "Contact the Bureau of Proclamation. Immediately locate where they are now. Contact the Traffic Control Bureau. Block the traffic in this area. At the same time, track the black off-road vehicle. Inform the team to be ready to assemble at any time." There was only debris on the ground and the stunned staff in the toll station. There was no trace of the black off-road vehicle. The officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau were very clear that the target they were chasing this time was an extremely excellent spy. Moreover, the other party had worked in the Investigation Bureau for many years and was very familiar with the internal communications and procedures of the Investigation Bureau. Therefore, before this operation, this batch of Investigation Bureau's team deliberately chose an unusual channel. Even if the heavy rifle that stretched out from the civilian off-road vehicle ruthlessly and coldly overturned several cars, the officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau still did not have the slightest intention to retreat. This was because if Shi Qinghai did not have this ability, he would not have been able to graduate from the first military academy as the top student. Moreover, he would not have been so favored in the Investigation Bureau. They were fully prepared for the upcoming difficulties and firmly believed that with the help of the Bureau of Proclamation's location, they would definitely be able to catch the other party. But the problem was the person driving the off-road vehicle. The middle-aged official's eyes were spitting fire. Looking at the seemingly endless road in front of him, he quickly issued orders to close the net one by one. But in his heart, he was thinking, was that a madman? Even if it was a Special Forces soldier who had received the most rigorous training, it was impossible to drive a civilian off-road vehicle at such a crazy speed. Thinking of the off-road vehicle that roared like a black ghost, the middle-aged official's heart was abnormally heavy. The other party did not look like he was running for his life at all, but more like he was giving up his life. Any normal person would subconsciously slow down at such a speed. This was an instinct. But that driver did not seem to have the word fear in his instincts. Forcefully changing gears, the handbrake was on, and the left foot stomped hard. The black civilian off-road vehicle that had been sliding at a high speed for 200 meters in neutral still maintained its high speed. Under the collective cooperation of the 3 braking methods, it slammed into the garage door with a loud bang. Shi Qinghai carried his backpack and walked out of the car with a pale face. He almost vomited. He was a well-trained professional. Previously, when faced with a hail of bullets, he would not be so frightened. But sitting in Su Li's car, he felt scared. "I don't want you to drive anymore." Shi Qinghai stared painfully at Su Lu in the driver's seat. "I would rather be taken back and tortured by the Bureau of Investigation than risk my life with you." Su Li's face was also abnormally pale. His outstretched hands trembled slightly in the air, and he was unable to leave the seat. He glanced at Shi Qinghai and said in a trembling voice, "Help me, I can't get out." Shi Qinghai thought that Su Lu had finally been unable to withstand the fear and tension after experiencing the crazy racing and escape. He was so scared that he couldn't move. He opened the car door and unfastened the seatbelt that bound Su Li's body. He wanted to carry him out, but found that he could not move. He stared at Su Li's right foot, which was wrapped into a white cement pillar. In silence, his face began to become extremely colorful. Chapter 143. I still can't connect to the internet at home. Today, I'm the leader who's updating. It said that the cable outside is broken. It's being fixed right now, and it should be fixed by tonight. Everyone, for the sake of my persistence in updating, please give me more monthly votes. If the official from the Federation Investigation Bureau knew that the answer that puzzled him was actually just a small accident, he would definitely want to vomit blood and die. Su Li's right leg, which was sealed with medical plaster, played an absolutely important role in this escape. If it wasn't stuck between the seat and the gas pedal, turning into a steering wheel lock that was often seen in action movies, or some other hard object that was used to push the gas pedal, since it was his first time driving a car, no matter how talented he was when it came to machinery, he wouldn't have been able to turn the civilian off-road vehicle into a crazy monster that cared about speed more than life. It would have been impossible for him to kill his way out of the encirclement of the FBI. Humans were naturally afraid of death. No one dared to step on the accelerator all the way and use the steering wheel and gear to cause trouble. The problem was that Su Li's right leg that stepped on the accelerator was no longer under his control. It was like a concrete pillar. A cunning rabbit had at least 3 nests for escape. Shi Qinghai, who had been a spy in the Federation Investigation Bureau for so long, was naturally no exception. At this time, the two of them were already far away from the civilian off-road vehicle that saved their lives and almost killed them. They disguised themselves as 2 ordinary Federation office workers and came to a small building on a street in Linhai. In a dark room, the Investigation Bureau changed the channel. Shi Qinghai carefully fiddled with a small receiver. Fortunately, they didn't have time to clean up the things I hid in the intranet. Su Lu was half lying on a bed. His face was unhealthily pale. After all, he was seriously injured in the Linhai gymnasium, and today he suffered both physical and mental torture. He felt like he couldn't bear it anymore, especially his stomach, which was very hungry. If the government people didn't follow me here, then how did they know where you were? Su Lu gently rubbed his waist and narrowed his eyes at Shi Qinghai. That's why I had to leave immediately. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have met you this morning. A trace of apology flashed across Shi Qinghai's beautiful face. He smiled bitterly and said, I thought that my colleagues in the Bureau of Proclamation wouldn't be able to find any trace of me. I didn't expect that those who wanted me dead would apply for the authority of the Bureau of Proclamation. Are you sure that the Bureau of Proclamation is helping the hunters locate them? Su Li's expression turned a little ugly. Ever since he had escaped from the Donglin region, the word he hated the most was the word charter. Just like what Uncle Feng Yu had lamented beside the mine pit back then, the law he hated the most in his life, other than the Wildlife Protection Act, was the first charter. Su Lu had been hunted down by the Bureau of Proclamation before, so he felt that the current situation was a little strange. He looked at Shi Qinghai and said, according to the charter I checked online, the Bureau of Proclamation shouldn't care about the actions of the anti-government forces. They should just monitor them according to the regulations. After thinking for a while, he said seriously, and if the Bureau of Proclamation is really involved in this hunt, I don't think we'll have time to sit here and chat. When they were escaping from Donglin, the Special Forces only needed 4 minutes and 12 seconds to accurately locate Feng Yu and Su Lu. At this time, the two of them were on the same planet as the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation, so the transmission of information could be considered to be at the same time. So Su Lu understood why no one had broken into the house after so much time had passed. In fact, this was just because he didn't understand that the hunt that happened to him and his uncle was a rare first-order incident in the entire Federation. It required the use of the entire Federation's electronic surveillance network and a lot of resources to achieve real-time location. And today, Shi Qinghai and his uncle were facing only the authority of the Fifth Order. I don't know why the Bureau of Proclamation is involved, but I believe that my feeling is right. Otherwise, those guys wouldn't have been able to find me. Shi Qinghai's beautiful eyebrows revealed a hint of despair. He forced a smile and said, "As for why no one has broken into the house at this time, I don't know. After all, I've never been hunted down by the entire Federation." Su Lu wanted to say that he had been hunted down before. Looking at the faint sadness between Shi Qinghai's eyebrows, he couldn't help but say, "Even if the Bureau of Proclamation is involved, it's not a big deal. I have a way to let you escape." Shi Qinghai didn't understand this sentence. Even if he had heard it, he would have thought that Su Lu was comforting him. The world was used to the omnipresence of the First Charter. Even a professional like Shi Qinghai, who was good at hiding his powerful abilities under a romantic appearance, would not have the ambition to escape under the brilliance of the Bureau of Proclamation. He just didn't understand why the Bureau of Proclamation was involved in the Federation Investigation Bureau's search for anti-government military spies. The holographic screen of the wristwatch was playing the news. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai watched quietly, their faces gradually becoming dignified. The news was describing the chase and gunfight on the Linhai Ring Highway. At the same time, the spokesperson of the police system was interviewed by the television station and confirmed that the criminal being hunted down by the Federation Investigation Bureau and the police was one of the main suspects in the fire at the Jingzhou Electric Power Export Company yesterday. The authorities had classified this suspect as a terrorist. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai looked at each other and saw the complicated emotions in each other's eyes. "Were you in Jingzhou yesterday?" "I was in Fart Prefecture yesterday." At this point, the situation was clear. The relevant departments of the Federation government, in order to end the shock wave brought to the government by the Linhai Gymnasium assassination as soon as possible, the traitor of the anti-government army and some other forces, in order to cover up some truth, found a way to work together at this moment. They perfectly cooperated with each other and hid the real crime of hunting down Shi Qinghai. In the name of a terrorist, they obtained the authority and cooperation of the Bureau of Proclamation. They had to catch Shi Qinghai or kill Shi Qinghai. The government can be so shameless. Su Lu sighed with emotion. He immediately thought of Uncle Feng Yu's comments on the first charter many years ago. Yes, even if the central computer had the right starting point, no matter how powerful it was, and no matter how detailed the legal constraints of the charter were, it was still a machine in the hands of human beings. If the human who controlled it had a problem, it would naturally have a problem. The government has always been so shameless, but I didn't expect that such a big lineup was actually because of me. I feel very honored. Shi Qinghai was carefully listening to the movements in the earpiece while assembling the gun. Suddenly, he frowned and said, "They changed the channel. I didn't notice that there was something wrong with the conversation in the past few minutes. Maybe they have already arrived." After saying this, Shi Qinghai pulled out an ultra-thin holographic screen from beside him, as if he was performing a magic trick. Some dark red light spots appeared on the holographic screen. Su Guang looked at this scene in a daze. He thought to himself, as expected of an agent, he always has such a high-tech device around him. The ultra-thin holographic screen seemed to be some kind of detection device, but Su Lu had never seen it before. Looking at the units on the screen, it should cover a distance of 500 meters around the building. When Shi Qinghai chose this escape point, he should have installed a lot of surveillance equipment outside. They have already arrived, but there seems to be some other people. Shi Qinghai looked at the moving light spots on the holographic screen. He scratched his hair, making his meticulously oiled hair become messy as usual. He smiled and said, "I'm leaving, you go hide in the basement." "I'm leaving, not the other way around." The Federation Investigation Bureau only used 20 minutes to find Shi Qinghai's most secret hiding place. This outstanding professional, under the glory of the First Charter, really couldn't muster up too much courage. He smiled at Su Lu and said, "You are already stupid enough to come back to Lin Hai, but I don't think you are stupid enough to follow me to the Dead Sea." "I'm not stupid." Su Lu lowered his head, put the original number card that the staff of the Tai family gave him back into his phone, and calmly replied, "Although I haven't received the kind of professional training that you guys have, I have more experience than anyone in the Federation in dealing with the First Charter." After saying this, Su Lu raised his left hand, and aimed the metal bracelet on his wrist at the back of Shi Qinghai's neck. However, in the next moment, Shi Qinghai's figure had already disappeared from the room. He jumped down from the balcony, leaving only Su Lu, who had crutches beside him and couldn't move freely. "It seems that you really don't have much confidence in me." Su Lu smiled, leaned on the metal crutches, and jumped down from the balcony after him. Shi Qinghai looked at Su Lu, who had landed beside him, dumbfounded. He tilted his head and praised, "First, you are really good, even a cripple can jump off a building. Second, you are really not afraid of death, but how am I going to escape with a cripple like you?" Su Lu smiled. At this time, he really didn't have the mood to bicker with him, nor did he have the time to express his gratitude. If the Bureau of Proclamation was tracking Shi Qinghai's chip, then after he left, he would naturally be safe in the basement. The Federation Bureau of Investigation wants to arrest you, but maybe there are also people who want to kill you. Su Lu thought back to the time when he was in Donglin, when the federal military launched an attack on the repair shop without warning. His heart felt heavy. They carefully walked through 2 Street. At the exit, the two of them were interrogated. They were wearing black suits and milky white headphones, and they couldn't wait to announce to the whole world that they were secret agent. "If you can avoid killing people, then don't kill people. I don't want you to really become a terrorist." Su Lu pulled down his cap, covering most of his face, and put the metal crutches back into the cylinder. He clung onto Shi Qinghai's shoulder, pretending to be a drunk man, and walked toward the intersection where the secret agents were standing. "It's only 12 o'clock. Isn't it a little too early to be drunk?" Shi Qinghai lowered his head slightly and whispered in his ear, "Besides, I have so many guns on my back, even a fool can see it." "That's your problem. Of all the things to learn, you just had to learn from the gorillas in the mountains. Don't forget, I was originally a member of the gorillas, but that cap of yours is quite unique. Where did you buy it?" "Jian Shuer gave it to you." "Who?" "Jian Shuer, you didn't hear wrong, but this is a very long story." He walked in front of the secret agents of the Federation Bureau of Investigation, who were squinting their eyes and vigilantly watching the pedestrians. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai's meaningless conversation came to an abrupt end, and the two of them tacitly separated at the same time. Su Li's retractable crutches suddenly popped out and hit one of the secret agents in the middle of his forehead. At the same time, he fell in that direction and hit the back of the secret agent's head with the tip of his elbow in a strange posture. Chapter 144. In a small airport on the outskirts of Lin Hai, 3 helicopters painted in black were ready to take off. The strong wind blew the thin snow on the ground, making it flutter like catkins on the banks of the Rose River in early spring. However, the fully armed people next to the helicopters didn't have the time to be sad. Xuan, the director of the Black Eagle Security Company, stared coldly at the subordinates rushing from behind. He looked down at the time on his watch and said loudly, "The cell phone signal has been located. The target is trying to escape from Lin Hai through the 3 blockades set by the Federation Investigation Bureau." According to the analysis, the target can only break through 2 blockades at most. Our mission is to intercept the target before the 3rd blockade. Xuan had been retired from the military for 6 years, but he had been performing paramilitary tasks in the Black Eagle Security Company. His words were still as concise and powerful as a military officer. Last time in the gymnasium, you lost all your face. This time, you must earn it back. Xuan stared into his subordinate's eyes and said fiercely. He added a sentence to himself in his heart, especially in front of the young master's friend. If it wasn't for that person last time, perhaps he would have already committed suicide by swallowing a gun. Change equipment. Following the order, Black Eagle, one of the most powerful security companies in the Federation, began to change equipment. A box was opened and all kinds of spray equipment were moved over. The combatants of the security company wore bulletproof vests with the police logo, and the 3 black helicopters were quickly sprayed with the logo of Lin High Police Headquarters. "Let's go," Xuan ordered, stepped on the scattered snow and boarded the helicopter. The dark underground parking lot brought a strong sense of uneasiness to Su Lu. He sat in the passenger seat of the small truck, looking at the continuous countdown on the screen in his hand, and said in a hoarse voice, 15 minutes until the next location. After escaping from the small building, the 2 of them had been intercepted several times by the Federation Investigation Bureau. Through the calculation of time and Shi Qinghai's understanding of the Investigation Bureau's execution power, Su Lu roughly figured out the time needed for each location. The small truck was hit by a sniper rifle earlier and almost capsized. The exploded metal pieces flew everywhere, and the situation was very dangerous. At this time, Shi Qinghai got out of the sedan beside the truck and nodded at Su Lu, indicating that it was done. "It's all right." Su Lu exhaled and wiped away the trace of blood on the corner of his eyebrows. He jumped out of the truck with the help of his metal crutches and got into the car with a new owner. He said with lingering fear, "It should only be a sequence 5. Otherwise, we would have died long ago." Shi Qinghai lit a cigarette. His handsome face was full of exhaustion. He had been on the run for less than an hour, but he was already mentally and physically exhausted. It was even more painful than running for the past month. No matter where he hid, it wouldn't be long before the electronic surveillance network that covered the entire Federation would receive the data from the chip on the back of his neck and feed back his position to the Federation's Investigation Bureau that was in charge of pursuing him. There was really no hope for this kind of escape. "You know a lot," Shi Qinghai looked at Su Lu and said very seriously, "You surprised me. If you had believed in my ability to pick locks, the time it took to get rid of that sedan could have been much faster." Su Lu said, "In the end, I don't know you, and you don't know me well enough. If you really want to live, you have to believe me. I don't have the time to listen to your nonsense." Shi Qinghai obviously didn't believe that there was anyone in the world who could remove the chip on the back of his neck. Even if an extremely sophisticated surgery could do this, how could he survive in the Federation without the chip? He smiled and said to Su Lu, "Although we don't know each other's secrets, at least we're in a life and death situation right now." He suddenly frowned and said in disgust, "But I think this is very shameful. Why do you want to die with me? I also think it's very strange. Why did you come back to Linhai to see me when you had clearly escaped?" Su Lu said, "That's because you knew someone was investigating me, so you wanted to warn me. Speaking of which, it's really quite boring. No wonder Tai Zuan kept trying to stop me from coming back. Even if I didn't come back, I would have been caught by the Federation in the end, unless I had the ability to escape to the Great Triangle." Shi Qinghai took a deep drag on his cigarette. He had already thrown away the empty pack. He glanced at Su Lu and handed the remaining half of the cigarette to him. "But you're different. If you were still lying in the general hospital, these things wouldn't have a damn thing to do with you." Su Lu took the half of the cigarette and took a deep drag. Then he found that the mouth of the cigarette was wet and couldn't help but feel a little disgusted. I have countless women and colleagues in my life, but the ones who really care about me are probably that teacher of mine and you. Shi Qinghai's smile was a little dim. Teacher is already dead. I was hoping that you could survive. After I died, at least there would be someone to clean my grave for me, and someone to arrange a bouquet of flowers for me on the anniversary of my death. I also have very few friends, so I can't lose any of them. Su Lu used 2 fingers to clamp the already short cigarette butt and took a deep drag. He almost choked and coughed. As for why I came, you don't believe me. Tai Ziyuan doesn't believe me. I think Jian Shuer, who helped me escape, also doesn't believe that I can really help you. Su Lu did have the ability to help Shi Qinghai escape from the Bureau of Proclamation. This was the biggest secret in his life, and it was hidden in the metal bracelet on his wrist. When his friend was in a desperate situation, Su Lu certainly wouldn't be stingy with sharing this secret. It was just that he didn't have the opportunity to change Shi Qinghai's ID chip when they were in the small building. Later on, they were in a hurry to escape, so he really didn't have the time. Su Lu had changed his ID chip before, so he knew that the intense pain, as if the electric current was passing through the body, was really unbearable. It was very likely that the person involved would fall into a coma. In fact, he had been unconscious for several hours that rainy night. If Shi Qinghai had fallen into a coma at this time, and his leg was lame, he really didn't have the confidence to escape from the government's arrest. So he changed the SIM card back to the original one and waited silently and nervously. You really know Jian Shuer? Shi Qinghai subconsciously glanced at the baseball cap on Su Li's head. Only then did he notice that this baseball cap was indeed a little too small and cute. He shrugged in disbelief. Or is this the coldest joke I'm going to tell before I die? We'll talk about that later. I just want to explain once why I want to go back to Linhai and why I want to help you. Su Lu threw the cigarette butt out of the window. His nose twitched slightly, and he said with a calm face, from the assassination attempt on Tai Yuan in the gymnasium, to the death of your superior, to you being hunted down, everything was caused by Zhang Xiaoming. Whether she did it intentionally or not, it's still her responsibility. Zhang Xiaoming is my woman. She made a mistake, so I want to help her solve it, said Su Lu. Shi Qinghai tilted his head and looked at him. After a while, he said, I just realized today that you're like a civil rights hero who lived in the early days of the constitutional era, the embodiment of justice. The problem is that it's disgusting. You're just a male animal whose cerebral cortex has been affected by the concentration of alcohol. Hearing the profanity, Su Lu smiled. He thought to himself that his cerebral cortex was indeed abnormal. He stared at the hologram on Shi Qinghai's wrist and began to count down. 30 seconds left. Shi Qinghai lightly stepped on the accelerator and stared intently at the exit of the underground parking lot. He pointed at a direction on the hologram and said, Confirm whether this road is clear or not. Su Lu looked at the map on the hologram and said, No problem. The stolen car found a road in the middle of several streets and alleys. It turned into a cloud of dust and broke through the roadblocks set up by the police. Once again, it rushed into the streets of Linhai City. Countless police cars and black station wagons, which were very characteristic of the Federation Investigation Bureau, began to chase after the car. The sirens were long and loud. At this time, only the traffic monitoring system of the police headquarters in Linhai City was enough to ensure the success of the chase. They no longer needed the help of the Bureau of Proclamation's location. This is a slow suicide. Shi Qinghai suddenly turned the steering wheel and avoided a truck in front of him. He said loudly, As a professional, I shouldn't listen to you and drive away. I can find a random house and point a gun at a beautiful woman as a hostage. I can hide for half a month. Su Lu replied, You forgot the location of the Bureau of Proclamation. Shi Qinghai's face changed slightly. He cursed loudly, "Fuck the first charter." On the parallel streets, police cars with flashing lights had begun to appear. From time to time, fierce figures could be seen from the corners of the street. Shi Qinghai took a deep breath and focused on the front. He said, "I'm ready to fight and then die. If you can't create any more miracles, you can get out of here." "I'm also waiting for a miracle." Su Lu held the phone tightly. Sweat gradually seeped out. At this time, the phone rang. It showed a strange number. "I'm Su Lu. My surname is Xue. How can I help you?" Su Lu smiled. He turned his head and told Shi Qinghai the coordinate. The two quickly found the street indicated by the coordinates on the hologram map. Shi Qinghai drove the car and made a forced turn. He barely got rid of the two police cars that were closest to him and sped toward the street. This was a long straight street with no forks. At the end of the street there was a faint buzzing sound. The air seemed to be vibrated by something. 3 black, matte helicopters appeared at the end of the road. At the edge of the helicopters' cabins, heavily armed policemen vigilantly scanned the street below. They aimed the black rotary barrels in their hands at the whole street. The miniature Darlin gun barrels could turn a car into a hornet's nest with just one sweep. The rotary barrels with a metallic luster were still so gloomy and cold under the noon sun. "Police." Shi Qinghai's eyes suddenly became very calm. He stared at the horrible existence that suddenly appeared above the street. Under such powerful firepower, he was too lazy to make any evasive movements. Chapter 145. 3 black helicopters painted with the words, "Police Headquarters," hovered up and flew along the streets of Linhai toward the horizon. Looking down from the cabin, one could see the chaotic sound of sirens everywhere, the roaring police cars, and the chaos that still hadn't subsided. Entering the police station's intranet, accurately grasping the other party's communication, and successfully disguising themselves. The very professional Black Eagle Security Company had no difficulty in rescuing 2 people in this city. Of course, this operation was still very risky. If it was discovered that the Black Eagle Security Company had impersonated the Federation Police, it would still be difficult to face the wrath of the Federation government with the company's background. Therefore, the 3 black helicopters retreated very neatly, leaving only a small team responsible for disrupting the public's hearing. Accompanied by the sound of the wind above the streets, no traces were left behind. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the buildings under his feet that swept past from time to time. His mood was slightly complicated. This was too much like a scene in a movie and not like something that happened in reality. He glanced at Shi Qinghai's watch and said to the director surnamed Xue beside him, "We are in the charter's positioning. The next time the Federation Investigation Bureau gets the coordinates will be about 5 minutes later." Hearing this, Xue Nian's face slightly darkened. He didn't expect that this mission would be so troublesome. Although the security company team he led was more professional than the federal military, he didn't have any confidence in escaping the tracking of the Federation's electronic monitoring network. Although the target was located in a helicopter moving at high speed, the Bureau of Proclamation's computer positioning could completely ignore this level of movement. "It should be the 5th sequence," said Su Lu. Xue Nian's expression eased a little. He immediately picked up the satellite communicator in his hand and reported the information to the director at the base, asking the higher-ups to find a solution. The fully armed people in the cabin vigilantly watched any movement under the helicopter. Professional staff were monitoring the cooperation between the Linhai Police Headquarters and the Federation Investigation Bureau. From time to time, they released identification signals to confuse the other party's monitoring system. These employees of the Blackhawk Security Company had their faces covered, and their bodies revealed a cold aura. The guns in their hands were also the most advanced weapons of the federal military. Shi Qinghai, who had been silent since he boarded the helicopter, coldly observed all the details in the cabin. Looking at the hands of the staff of Black Hawk Security Company, a faint self-deprecating smile flashed across his eyes. Just like what George Carlin had said, the 7 great families of the Federation would always be above the law in certain aspects because they had more resources, more wealth, and more information. Shi Qinghai's beautiful eyebrows furrowed as he thought to himself. The people in the Federation have always thought that the Black Hawk Security Company has the backing of the Ministry of National Defense. Who would have thought that this extremely powerful company is almost equivalent to the private army of the Tai family? The noise in the cabin was very loud. Shi Qinghai no longer stared at Xuan, who was nervously communicating with some people. Although he very keenly judged that this security director surnamed Shui must have been a powerful figure in the Federal Army back then, he didn't want to care about this right now. He turned around, grabbed Su Li's clothes, and approached his ear. In the roaring noise, he asked very seriously in a loud voice, "Do you really know Jian Shuer?" Su Li's expression suddenly froze. He didn't expect that at such a tense moment, Shi Qinghai couldn't forget about the peaked cap and the national idol. Under the escort and cover of the Black Hawk Security Company, 3 black helicopters, like 3 ghosts, swaggered through the layers of Federation Investigation Bureau and Lin High Police Headquarters encirclement, took Shi Qinghai and Su Lu out of the city, flew about 40 kilometers in the southwest direction, and slowly landed on a simple tarmac. It was believed that in the conclusion that the sudden appearance and departure of these 3 helicopters would definitely reveal something, but whether or not it could be traced back to the Black Hawk Security Company depended on how much effort the Federation government was willing to spend on this matter and how deep the investigation was. After getting off the helicopter, the fully armed bodyguards surrounded Su Lu and Shi Qinghai to change cars. Along the way, except for Xuan, who occasionally whispered a few words to Su Lu, the entire motorcade seemed to be unusually silent and calm. Shi Qinghai had been watching coldly from the sidelines, and had the most direct impression of the true strength of the mysterious 7 families of the Federation. After continuously speeding for an hour, the motorcade arrived at a base on the outskirts of Shangye. From the outside, this base looked like a very ordinary synthetic food factory, but in fact, it was one of the bases that the Tai family distributed in the major states of the Federation. In a lounge, Su Lu and Shi Qinghai restocked on some food and water. The door of the room was pushed open, and a man of about 30 years old calmly walked in. He walked to the front of the 2 and said softly, "I just received news that the Bureau of Proclamation has stopped tracking your location." Although the person who walked in was not Tai Ziyuan, he was presumably an important staff member of the Tai family. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai stood up from the sofa to welcome him. After all, it was thanks to this person that they were able to successfully escape from the government's pursuit. However, Shi Qinghai looked at the face of the man of about 30 years old, and slightly frowned. He said, "Thank you, but I didn't expect that you are now working for the Tai family." Su Lu realized that Shi Qinghai knew the person in front of him. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised, but his character made him keep silent and didn't ask curiously. The man looked at Shi Qinghai and smiled. He said, "I am working for the Xiao Shu Foundation. Of course, in a sense, I am also working for the Tai family. This is not much different from working for the Federation." He turned to Su Lu and smiled slightly, as if he knew the doubts in Su Li's mind. He introduced himself. "My name is Xunli. I graduated from the 1st Military Academy, and now I am a senior manager of the Black Eagle Security Company. I am in charge of today's operation. Shi Qinghai is my junior, so he knows me." Shi Qinghai looked at him quietly and said, "After you graduated, there was no trace of you. We all thought that you were sent to the West Woods by the Ministry of Defense to carry out a secret mission. We didn't expect you to be in the Tai family. I am very curious, did you confirm your job before you entered the military academy?" "I am in a targeted training program. You know my family's financial situation, so I can only go to the military academy, which is free of charge. Shinli smiled and said, As for when I confirmed my job after graduation, this is not important, just like I won't ask when you became a spy for the anti-government army. Shi Qinghai shrugged and said, I am also poor, so I can only go to the military academy. George Carlin said that the poor have the most courage to change society. I don't want to disturb your reminiscing, and I am also very curious why the best students from the most famous military academy in the Federation didn't join the army. Sulu looked at Shinli and said, But I think what we need to think about now is not this. Shinli nodded slightly to Sulu and said, We will arrange for you to go back to the general hospital right away. The boarding record of the airport has been erased. If there is a government official in the future, you will stay in the ward for 2 days. He added, As for Jian Shuer, it should be the young master who went to ask Miss Jian in person, so she won't say anything. For some reason, this senior manager of the Blackhawk Security Company was more respectful to Su Lu than to Shi Qinghai. Although it was not obvious, it was always there. Shinli turned his head, looked at Shi Qinghai and said, The route back to S2 has been confirmed. If you want, you can leave now. How do I leave? Shi Qinghai was a spy for the anti-government army, so he did not like to deal with the powerful people in the Federation, but he knew that he owed Shinli a big favor today. Especially with Shinli's previous words, which could make the Bureau of Proclamation terminate the tracking of his location in advance, even with the power of the Tai family. He was afraid that even with the power of the Tai family, it would not be a small price to pay. Illegal immigration, Shinli said with a smile. This should be the most familiar way of transportation for people like you. Shi Qinghai heard the hidden meaning in this sentence, and could not help but frown slightly. He said, Maybe in the near future, you will be the ones who need to be illegal. Shinli left the lounge, and the smell of gunpowder in the last 2 sentences of the conversation disappeared. Sulu looked at Shi Qinghai silently and said, Since you know each other, why are you still so rude? We used to have a good relationship, Shi Qinghai said, but since we have embarked on a different path, it is natural that we cannot go back to how we used to be. The Tai family is not the Federation government. Sulu said with a headache, Even if you are a soldier of the anti-government army, after all, it was them who helped us today. The goal of the anti-government army is to overthrow the control of the 7 major families and those shameless politicians on the Federation. Shi Qinghai closed his eyes slightly and said, You have seen what happened today. The Tai family is not the Federation government, but it is a pair of rabbits that are born together with the Federation government. Didn't Councilman Pabre just reach a peace agreement with you? The temporary peace is because both sides need each other's benefits. Shi Qinghai smiled and said, When there is no need for each other in the future, the peace will naturally be gone. At this moment, a voice rang out in the quiet lounge. The voice was full of mockery. That's why I've never tried to seek peace. Just as you said, our goal is to eliminate you traitors. A screen hung down from the ceiling of the lounge. On the screen was Tai Ziyuan's slightly pale face, and his calm eyes were full of pressure and disdain. Chapter 146. The Federation had many historical sites, but there was no such thing as a pyramid. If this society also had a pyramid, then people like Tai Ziyuan would undoubtedly be one of those people who stood at the very top of the pyramid and looked at the scenery. His family background, the education he received since childhood, or more accurately speaking, the class he belonged to, which was also the position he sat on, it was destined that this young and proud successor of the Tai family would only snort in disdain and feel incomparable hatred towards George Carlin's set of theories. In Tai Ziyuan's eyes, the group of anti-government forces coiled around the S2 Green Dragon Mountain area did not hesitate to use violence to destroy the stable structure of the Federation for a set of illusory political theories, for the so-called Dogsh*T justice. Facing the threat of the Empire's powerful military, the existence of the anti-government forces not only forced the Federation government to expend a large amount of attention, it also wasted countless taxpayer dollars. More importantly, it created a gap in the Federation's society. If the people's hearts were divided, how would they face the Empire's invasion? What was the difference between this type of behavior and those traitors who betrayed the interests of the Federation? If possible, Tai Zhuan was willing to have the Federal Army sweep clean all of the armed forces in Green Dragon Mountain in the shortest amount of time possible. However, decades of history proved that without the help of the First Charter, the complex terrain of Green Dragon Mountain, as well as the chaotic electronic turbulence atmosphere that was extremely unsuitable for large-scale mechanical warfare, was enough to help those stubborn anti-government forces who lacked resources but refused to admit defeat resist the Federal Army's spring offensive. Could only be done slowly. Therefore, when the number 2 figure of the anti-government forces braved the enormous danger and met with Tai Zhuan at the Double Moon Festival Ball, Tai Zhuan did not impulsively hand the other person over to the government. Instead, he forcefully suppressed the hostility in his heart and very rationally facilitated Pabre's trip to Green Dragon Mountain. However, Tai Zhuan's attitude towards the anti-government forces in Green Dragon Mountain had never changed, never softened. If the situation permitted, if he truly stood on the political stage of the Federation, perhaps he would be even more unyielding than the officers of the 2nd Military Region and the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Defense who committed suicide. On the screen, Tai Zhuan's thin and pale face showed a hint of mockery. He said, "I saved you this time, not because I agree with your ideals, but because you are the middleman in this settlement agreement. You know too many details, and those details require you to go back to S2 to carry out. In addition, I don't like the fact that some people in the government treat the assassination in the gymnasium as a game. My dignity doesn't allow me to be kept in the dark. I don't want to see any scapegoats they find die. Of course, if Su Lo hadn't returned to Lin Hai, maybe I wouldn't care about your life or death." There was not much to remember about this conversation, and it was soon over. But before it ended, 3 young men with completely different identities and positions did a math problem. For example, how many lives did Tai Zhuan owe to Su Lo? How many lives did Shi Qinghai owe to Tai Zhuan? How many lives did Shi Qinghai owe to Tai Zhuan? And how many lives did he return to Su Lo? As a result, the most silent Su Lu became the biggest creditor. That night, Shi Qinghai left the base. He did not accept the arrangement of the Black Eagle Security Company to take the stowaway Nearstar spaceship to S2. Instead, he quietly disappeared into the darkness again. As long as the Bureau of Proclamation no longer tracked him down, it was believed that this excellent spy would be able to find his own organization again, and silently lurk in order to do something for the teacher who died tragically in front of him. The next day, Su Lu returned to the 1st Military General Hospital in the southwest region of Jingzhou. Tai Zhuan still had some things to deal with in the capital special district. He said that he would see him in 10 days, and told Su Lu to wait in the hospital. It seemed that another long talk was about to begin. The familiar courtyard, the familiar smell of medicine, and the snow-white ceiling, Su Lu had been silent. He did not have much literary spirit to worry about whether the struggle between the several camps in the Federation would bring some kind of fatalistic tragedy to his friends. Literary spirit always made short sentences become long sentences, and he was not used to this. He was used to thinking very directly. Everyone had their own life. Whether it was Tai Zhuan or Shi Qinghai's life, in his eyes, they were all too strange. It was not something that he could touch or want to touch. He had too many things to worry about, whether it was the disguised chip behind his neck, the gloomy and terrible black dream, or the fresh images that he could now skillfully reflect in his eyes. These were enough to make him restless. However, he still calmly rested and ate. Occasionally, he would think about his trip to Linhai and comfort himself. If he had not returned to Linhai, Tai Zhuan would definitely not have used his family's power to help Shi Qinghai escape. It seemed that a small figure like him could still play some role in this big era, even if it was very marginal and insignificant. Most of the time, he missed Zhang Xiaoming. He thought about Zhang Xiaoming, the girl who he met like a green duckweed in a stream and disappeared like a dewdrop in autumn. Where was she now? What was she doing? Was the assassination on New Year's Day really organized by such a delicate and fairy-like girl? Was her pair of red devil horns still in her luggage? Shi Qinghai said that his thoughts had been controlled by the intensity of his lust, but Su Lu did not admit this. He only thought of Zhang Xiaoming out of habit because in this world, there was only one girl of the opposite sex that he could think of. Moreover, this was the girl with whom he had once shared happy days and deep conversations. Su Lu did not even want to think about the role that Zhang Xiaoming might have played in this whole incident. He was just a little worried that under the pressure of the Federation government's investigation, the power behind her would abandon her like how it had treated Shi Qinghai. He had sincerely asked Tai Zhuan to help investigate her, but he still found nothing. Just as he was about to become sick from his longing and worry, Su Lu received a phone call. The girl's voice on the other end of the phone was incomparably light and incomparably sad, like the dark clouds floating in the late winter sky of Linhai. It was a little high up, but also a little heavy. It was like she was on the other side of the mountain, hearing voices but not seeing people. It was me who told them that you might have gone to the concert with Tai Zhuan. Su Lu held the phone in silence. After a long time, he said, "You didn't know that they wanted to kill Tai Zhuan?" "I didn't know. I thought that I was doing the right thing, but now I realize how childish I was." The girl's voice was incomparably lonely and self-deprecating. "Where are you now? Are you in danger?" "I'm very safe, but it seems that some people are investigating me, so I am preparing to leave." Hearing this, Su Lu was silent for a long time. He knew that it was definitely the Tai family investigating Zhang Xiaoming. With Tai Zhuan's personality, if it was really Senator Macklin who told the hawks in the Department of Defense about the concert, he would definitely not let go of Zhang Xiaoming, because only through Zhang Xiaoming could he get evidence to nail Senator Macklin down. "You still want to go back to that senator?" "No, I just want to do something more practical. You know yourself that you are a very childish person, so why do you still want to go? There has to be some improvement. I am a normal person. I can't understand how people like you think, and I don't know what is worth sacrificing human emotions, even if it is a very noble idea. I don't think it is worth sacrificing those things that shouldn't be sacrificed. I'm not only referring to what happened between you and me, but also a lot of things like life, like justice. Maybe you will ask me what justice is, but in my opinion, justice is doing the right thing." "What is the right thing to do?" "Something that can make one feel at ease, not bullying the weak, not harming innocent people. It should be like this, right?" The usually silent Su Lu held the phone tightly and said a lot of words. In the end, he said word by word, "I've said before, no matter how great a goal is, if the process to achieve it is dirty and ugly, then it will be dirty and ugly. I will remember what you said, and I will do the same in the future." Zhang Xiaoming answered seriously on the other end of the phone. In Su Li's small eyes, there was a flash of uncontrollable sadness. He said slowly, "I have an uncle who once asked me why men and women always like to buy 2 pairs of rings when they get married. That's because rings as big as diamonds, girls like to wear them to show off, but they can't do anything with them. Actually, I don't have high expectations for life. Before this happened, my biggest dream was to buy you a big ring and let you wear it everywhere to show off. Also, I'm very good at cooking, I'm very good at doing housework. You can always wear it and don't need to change. Now it looks like I don't have to spend money to buy a ring." Su Lu lay on the bed and said softly into the phone, Take care of yourself, don't be as naive as before. Woman, goodbye. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and then Zhang Xiaoming's voice came, Goodbye, man. In a corner of the waiting room at Jingzhou's Xinza spaceport. That man of yours can be called Saint Su Lu. An uncle with a wretched face, but his face was full of love. He looked at the silent girl beside him and comforted her. You are the future of this business. No matter how naive and childish you are, no matter how much damage you cause, as long as you face it bravely, it will become a mature experience for you. I know, I just feel very sorry for him. Zhang Xiaoming raised her face, took off her black-rimmed glasses, and wiped away her tears. She smiled stubbornly and said, And if he really likes me, in a few days, he will be sad again. The Tai family can't find any evidence, and I can't find any evidence either. Your words can't be used as evidence. The uncle smiled and said, In the Federation's territory, I can't do anything to that senator for now. I believe that your passenger number has fallen into his hand. 6 days later, the Federation's news channel broadcasted a piece of news. A spaceship flying from Xinza spaceport to region S2 failed to operate due to the aging circuit and crashed to the ground. All the passengers in the spaceship were killed. Chapter 147. According to the passenger number, the girl, who was supposed to be sitting in the 4L open space transfer cabin, was now sitting in a medium-sized bus that used old-fashioned energy and had a pungent smell. She was on her way to the military area of Green Dragon Mountain. The middle-aged man with a wretched face was still sitting next to her. Zhang Xiaoming looked at the primitive scenery outside the window and was silent for a long time. She didn't know if she was thinking about her naivety in the past, or if she was thinking about what kind of impact the news of her death would bring to her parents in Linhai and Sulu. The old-fashioned bus kept moving up and down on the mountain road. The middle-aged man's face was covered with a straw hat, but he seemed to enjoy the rhythm. He was very familiar with the roads that surrounded the four-state. Even if he closed his eyes, he knew where the bus was going. Maybe he was a little thirsty. The middle-aged man took off his straw hat and drank a mouthful of water from the water bottle that he always carried with him. Only then did he notice the stunned expression of the girl next to him. The slightly messy bangs on her forehead were mixed with the dust and sweat of the mountain area. She looked a little messy. There was a faint sadness on the girl's rosy face. He quietly looked at the young face and smiled slightly. He had been dealing with people his whole life. That was why he dared to enter the Double Moon Festival Ball alone last year and negotiate with the representatives of the Federation's powerful class face to face. He was very good at reading people, so he was very satisfied with Zhang Xiaoming's current performance. A young person who was loyal to her beliefs and had suffered a huge setback would mature quickly and become an indispensable new force in a great cause in the future. The future of the Revolutionary Army would depend on these young people. The wretched middle-aged man sighed softly in his heart. Zhang Xiaoming noticed that he had woken up. She lowered her eyes slightly and asked softly, If I were to die, what would happen to the Bureau of Proclamations files? Being able to think of this problem proves that you have made a lot of progress in the direction of professionalism. The middle-aged man smiled and said, No one can change the data of the computer in the Bureau of Proclamation, but there is always a link when the data reaches the government. As long as there is a link, there will be people. As long as there is someone, there will be a way. I am an old man who has a special way of dealing with people. Why did you personally arrange for my departure? Zhang Xiaoming looked at him. He was the second most powerful person in the anti-government army. How could he risk coming to S1 just because of her? Although she knew some things about Senator Macklin, it was still not enough to prove anything. A traitor has appeared in the upper echelons of the organization, seriously harming our cause. But as I've told you before, I can't change everyone's opinion of that councilman. After all, to a certain extent, He represents the public image of our mountain comrades in the Federation. It's just that I feel that you're innocent in this matter. You come from a good background, but because of your kind nature, you've developed sympathy for Green Dragon Mountain. We should be grateful to a young man like you, and not watch a girl die in a plot of betrayal." At this point, a faint sadness flashed between the middle-aged man's eyebrows. For his ideals and beliefs, he had struggled for many years in the Federation. However, the current situation was becoming more and more worrying. The completely unequal resources, information, and armed forces made it so that the anti-government army could only struggle at death's door in front of the Federal Army. Although more and more ordinary people in the Federation were influenced by George Carlinism and chose to sympathize with the anti-government army, but as Macklin walked out of the mountains and officially stepped onto the political stage, most of those people's hearts also turned to him, who claimed to be a non-violent advocate. The world in the mountains was about to become an abandoned world. He was an extremely outstanding intelligence leader, but he was not an outstanding political leader. He understood the undercurrents in the committee, but he could not quell them. After all, although Macklin's advocacy was suspected of being a capitulationist in a difficult situation, and in the background of the Federation government's deliberate conciliation, it was very attractive. In order to contend with the forces of Macklin's faction, the leader of the anti-government army, Nan Shui, had to temporarily give up on the armed struggle and instead seek cooperation with certain forces in the Federation. That was why he came to the Federation, why there was the Double Moon Festival Ball, why there was the cooperation with the Tai family, and why there was the solemn expression on Senator Prabble's face when he walked down the gangway of the transport plane. The middle-aged man's eyebrows were deeply furrowed. The summary of information from all sides, especially the confession of the girl beside him, pointed to the source of the information about the assassination in the Linhai City Gymnasium, as well as the person behind the scenes who tried to frame the anti-government army's intelligence system after the incident, thus destroying the reconciliation agreement between Pabre and Green Dragon Mountain. It was Senator Macklin, or rather, Senator Macklin. However, he did not have any evidence. Just based on Zhang Xiaoming's confession alone, it would never be able to shake the highly respected Macklin's lofty position in the committee and in the hearts of the people in the 4 states surrounding the mountains. What made him feel even more worried was that Macklin was not stupid. His political wisdom and experience were extremely rich. Could it be that this senator did not understand that if the armed forces of Green Dragon Mountain were really destroyed, then the last thing he relied on to gain a foothold in the Federation's political arena would also disappear? The struggle of political lines was one thing, but after all, both sides were rooted in the same land. If even the land they had a foothold on was burned to a crisp, then no one would be able to take root and sprout. This problem was too profound to be thought through clearly. The middle-aged man looked at Zhang Xiaoming, who was deep in thought beside him, and said with a trace of pity, "For me, there is another very important reason why I let you follow by my side to learn and prepare for the future. That is your relationship with Su Lo." Zhang Xiaoming looked at him in surprise. She did not understand the importance of her relationship with Su Lo. Her eyebrows gradually squeezed together. She took a deep breath and said seriously, "I will not hurt him again, and I will not agree to use him. Don't worry." The middle-aged man had already retracted his gaze. He began to read the magazine in his hand with great interest. He seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be telling Zhang Xiaoming. He said, "Su Lo is a person who sympathizes with us and is emotionally inclined toward us. This can be confirmed from the details of the past few days. As long as it is a person like this, we will have to fight for. Furthermore, he is someone who can influence Tai Ziyuan's choice. Perhaps it will be a year, perhaps it will be 5 years or even longer. As long as you can influence him, it will be worth the wait." The magazine in his hand seemed to be some kind of weekly news, but in reality, on the page was a very detailed summary of information. The information on this page was all the details of Su Li's arrival at Linhai University. This number 2 figure in the anti-government army, the most successful intelligence chief in the 37 constitutions, quietly looked at Su Li's file. He thought calmly in his heart, possibility is the most important foundation for the development of any business. And Su Lu, this seemingly insignificant person, seemed to have more possibilities than any of the people I met on this trip to the Federation. How did Su Lu get to know Taizuan? The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes slightly. His fingers lightly stroked the edge of his straw hat. For the S2 anti-government army, for those who paid attention to all the subtle movements around the Tai family heir, this was a mystery. From the file, Su Lu, a retired soldier with no family or friends, would not have had the opportunity to get close to Tai Zuan in Yue University. If it is really because of H1, then how did Su Lu have the authority to enter H1? If Su Lu can really enter H1, then the Black Mecha that suddenly appeared during the visit to the first military academy, was it Tai Zuan who was controlling it, or was it Su Lu who was controlling it? If it was Su Lu who was controlling it, where did he learn to control it? The number 2 leader of the anti-government army smiled, quickly organizing and analyzing the information in his mind. He had been dealing with people his whole life, and was an old man who had a special way of dealing with people. As the anti-government army was forced to enter a low point, he had already set his sights on the future, on the young man who was still very insignificant now. At this time, Zhang Xiaomeng had already turned her head to the side, staring blankly at the scenery outside the window. Her eyes gradually became moist. She missed him, but was strong enough to not miss him. Su Li's injuries were not completely healed, but he no longer required 24-hour intensive care. Those unnecessary medical equipment had long been removed from his bed. The specialists at the 1st Military General Hospital had also confirmed that his epilepsy was caused by external pressure. It was a non-genetic epilepsy, and the abnormal electrical discharge of the cerebral cortex would not cause substantial damage to his body and brain. Therefore, he moved out of the ward and moved to the quieter sanatorium at the back of the general hospital. The living facilities here were more complete. Steam rose from the hot springs between the green trees. If it was not summer in the southern hemisphere, perhaps he would have really thought of going down for a soak. The television in the room was no longer controlled by the medical department, so all channels were open. However, Su Lu still habitually watched the news channel and Channel 23. He was not a person who cared about the affairs of the Federation, but after escaping from the Donglin district, these bizarre encounters made him unable to not be concerned. That night, he saw the news about the accident of the spaceship flying from the Shinza Aviation Airport to S2. To be precise, it was the accident of the air-ground transfer cabin. Su Li's eyes narrowed slightly. His fingers tightened slightly as he stared at the clear holographic screen, watching the names and photos of the passengers gradually flashing on the screen. Zhang Xiaomeng, girl. Su Lu only heard these 4 words and saw the photo of a girl with a serious expression on the screen. Then, there was a buzzing sound in his brain, and he could no longer hear anything. The slightly sorrowful voice of the news anchor was automatically muted, and the photo on the screen gradually began to blur. Without the black-rimmed glasses, her bangs gently rippled in the breeze, and her eyes were smiling. She was as cute and charming as an elf. This was Zhang Xiaomeng, the real Zhang Xiaomeng. The one on the news and in the photo was all fake. Su Lu rubbed his eyes, turned off the television, and lay down on the bed. He covered himself with the quilt, curled up, and began to sleep. Although he couldn't sleep, he still began to sleep. His eyes were wide open, and his body was trembling slightly. He suddenly realized that the summer in the southern hemisphere of planet S1 was so cold. Unable to sleep in the middle of the night, His mood was like a sad song. He sat up silently, turned on the television again, and connected to the Federation's network. He entered the official website of the General Administration of Aviation and began to search. He kept refreshing the page, and after countless confirmations and verifications, he moved his fingers numbly. He lay on the bed, limp and powerless, and began to stare at the snow-white ceiling in a daze. At this time, he wished that everything he saw was just like those structural blueprints. They were all images in his mind and not real. But after staring at the snow-white ceiling for a long time, no images appeared in front of him. It turned out that sleeping couldn't make the sad news he had heard before become fake. The next day, Sulu woke up on time according to his biological clock. He brushed his teeth, washed his face, and ate breakfast. Then, he walked into the quiet garden in the morning light and sat on the slightly cold stone chair. His butt didn't touch the ground. He squatted in a strange position, using the horse stance that the uncle had taught him. At the same time, he carefully and attentively savored it, memorizing the tremor in his body, the existence of the sourness and the trajectory of its movement. The slightly warm tremor represented a mysterious force that had broken through the area that it had operated in the Donglin district back then. It gradually took over his entire body, causing every pair of muscle fibers to begin to rub against each other and squeeze against each other. It was incomparably painful and pleasurable. However, that bitterness lingered in his heart, lingering on his lips for a long time, making him want to vomit. His face was a little pale, and his eye sockets were a little deep, which outlined the outline of his small eyes a little deep. In the surrounding woods, several bodyguards of the Black Hawk Security Company were looking at the surrounding environment in boredom. Now that the situation had calmed down, their mission was not as important as it was a few days ago. They just didn't understand that Suli's walk today seemed to be longer than it had been a few days ago. Sulu stayed in this quiet garden until noon. Then, he said something to the staff of the Tai family. Under the secret protection of several bodyguards, he walked out of the sanatorium and came to a steakhouse in the living area of the 1st Military Region. He began to eat Chinese food. Before eating, he handed a bill to the waiter and quietly asked for a favor. The knife and fork gently cut the delicate surface of the synthetic steak. Sulu lowered his head and slowly chewed the very uniform meat fibers. He didn't raise his head at all, because he didn't dare to raise his head. He knew that once he did, he would see that the seat opposite him was empty. He and Zhang Xiaoming had eaten together many times in the cafeteria. He was deeply grateful to the girl. She never left under the strange stares of the surrounding people just because he was an auditing student and looked like a poor concierge. His first official date with Zhang Xiaoming was eating steak in a restaurant in Linhai. He was deeply grateful to the girl. She gave him the first love in his life. She gave him the first kiss, the first intimacy, and the first love. Even if it was charity, it was the most beautiful charity in the world. The waiter walked to his side. Hiding his puzzled expression, he handed over a bag of biscuits. After Sulu thanked him, he tore open the bag of biscuits, took out the puppy biscuits inside, and began to stare at them in a daze. The first time he and Zhang Xiaoming met was because of a bag of puppy biscuit. Sulu began to eat the biscuit. His tears flowed down uncontrollably. After the uncle's death, he swore that he would never cry again. But today, he didn't know why, but he couldn't help it. He felt empty and sour in his heart, as if there would never be anything that could fill that empty space. Or maybe it was because of the news of Zhang Xiaoming's death last night. Until this morning, when he was in a daze in the morning garden, the sour taste had been hidden for too long, and it stimulated his tear ducts. A well-dressed young man was crying silently in a lively restaurant. This was the living area of the 1st Military Region. There were many soldiers in civilian clothes and military uniforms, as well as their family and friends. Many people looked at the young man crying by the window in surprise, casting sympathetic or disdainful glances at him. They thought that the young man was crying because he was heartbroken, but they didn't know that the young man thought that he had lost his lover forever. After wiping away his tears, Su calmed down. He took out a letter and began to read it in silence. This letter was personally written by Shi Qinghai before he left. He had already read it once, but when he heard the news of Zhang Xiaoming's death, he wanted to read it again. Because in his opinion, Shi Qinghai and Zhang Xiaoming were the same kind of people. They were people that he didn't understand, but were willing to sacrifice something for their ideals. The last few paragraphs of Shi Qinghai's letter were written like this. I used to think that I was tired of being a spy. Even at the beginning, because of the misfortune that befell my father, I hated the Federation government so much. But in this gap, I felt tired and nervous, so I wanted to give up. It was also because of this that I began to try to leave the organization. Of course, it was the passive kind. I will never betray the organization because I agree with their ideals and respect them. But I was really tired, so I looked for many opportunities to become an unimportant person. The conflict in front of the nightclub was one of my attempts. I'm sorry that this matter dragged you down. However, just when I was at my most tired and began to doubt the ideals that I once believed in, I personally facilitated the agreement between the organization and Representative Pabre. Although I was only a link in the middle and never played an absolutely important role, I knew that I knew what I did. But I know that I did the right thing. Turns out that doing the right thing, for a numb person like me, can still bring some kind of spiritual joy. But at that time I still wanted to leave. I didn't want to care about anything in the world anymore. I only wanted to drink wine alone and sing 27 cups of wine. When I had free time on the beach, I would think about my poor father, who had never been to the capital in his life, who only knew how to manage the small farm, and who eventually died a bizarre death. However, right at this time, my guide died in front of me. He jumped down from a very tall building, as if he jumped into the clouds, but fell to the ground. My teacher was actually very similar to my second father in many ways. It was very strange. Although I hated that traitor, I didn't let this hatred get to my head. Instead, I seemed to be much more clear-headed. Looking at my teacher's corpse lying on the roof of the car, I suddenly understood that I was still willing to fight for the ideals that I had in the past. This ideal is not laughable, nor is it something that is far and unreachable for the people, for you and me. We are just trying to make this world a bit more beautiful, a bit more fair. At the very least, there won't be people like the Tai family, the 7 great families, politicians, these kinds of existences that are above the law. At the very least, there will be fewer ordinary people who silently died like my father. True fairness has never appeared in this world. It didn't exist in the era of imperial power, it didn't exist in the current constitutional era, and it might not exist in the future. It doesn't exist in the Empire, it doesn't exist in the Great Triangle, and sometimes I even suspect that it might not exist in the Green Dragon Mountain. However, what exists isn't always reasonable. What hasn't appeared before isn't something that can't be pursued. Fairness and justice might be very illusory words, but working hard for it is always better than being apathetic. There is a vague goal in front of you. If you walk, you will always be able to reach it. If you don't walk, you will never be able to touch it. I have carefully calculated that I will live for at most 90 years in this lifetime. People will always die. Since that is the case, I would rather die on the path that I have chosen. I am writing this letter to you not because I want to influence you, but because I am very lonely in this world. The role that I play is destined to be lonely, so I want to tell you my thoughts. I might not reconnect with the organization, because since we are walking on the same path, it doesn't matter whether we have companions or not, as long as we are working hard in the same direction. The fairness of this world doesn't necessarily require you to sacrifice everything you have. I have always believed that being a policeman who strictly abides by the law, being a lawyer who upholds justice, and being a warrior who bravely resists the invasion of the Empire is a positive effort towards the fate of the Federation. You are a person with a somewhat overflowing sense of justice. If you live according to your thoughts, even if you can't influence this world, you can at least influence the small environment around you. In this sense, we are companions, and we have many companions in this world. Live and then live well. Live with a clear conscience, and that is enough. Brother, I am going to find a clear conscience. Su Lu silently folded the letter and put it in his inner pocket. There was also a business card and a new bank card, which were the most important things in his life. Then he thought of Zhang Xiaoming from this letter. He still found it difficult to understand the thoughts of many people in the Federation, but after reading Shi Qinghai's letter again, he was somewhat moved. People will always die, and dying on the path that one has chosen may be a kind of happiness. Su Lu quietly thought of Zhang Xiaoming. The suspicion and anger that he had in the past were no longer important at this moment. Su Lu was a very silent and direct person. He didn't understand principles, and he didn't have any ideas. He was a young man who lived by intuition and intuition. He slowly raised his head and looked at the news that was playing on the screen in the dining room. On the news, the political leader of the opposition, Senator Medellin, who was giving a speech at the Capital University, announced that he would participate in the presidential election at the end of the year as the running mate of Governor Ross of Jingzhou. Chapter 148. A few days later, Tai Ziyuan arrived at the southwest part of Jingzhou. The boundless, jade-green sea stretched out from the silver beach into the distance, all the way to the horizon. The sea water on the beach was like a lover's hand gently caressing the white sand. Looking at this beautiful scene, people might feel that the sea was vast and the sky was clear. There were 2 white recliners under the umbrellas. In the woods behind the beach, there were many bodyguards from the Black Eagle Security Company. They were vigilantly watching their surroundings. Butler Jean, who was already old, stood calmly under the eaves of the beach terrace. He was avoiding the strong sunlight at dusk and the conversation between the young people on the 2 white recliners. I didn't think about your current mental state before I came here. I thought that the girl's unfortunate death would make you depressed for many days. Tai Ziyuan, who was wearing a white linen shirt, calmly looked at Su Lu beside him. He found that although Su Li's eyes were slightly sunken and his face was not as rosy as before, at least he was still mentally strong. Zhang Xiaoming's death was not normal. The spaceship lost control of the spaceship and fell to the ground, turning into a firework. After the incident, there was no evidence of tampering. The government's investigation could only conclude that it was an accident. However, Zhang Xiaoming's name was on the list of deceased passengers. People like Tai Ziyuan naturally understood the reason behind this incident immediately. The various departments of the government investigated the assassination at the Linhai State Gymnasium in different directions. Most of the officials focused on the Deputy Minister of National Defense, Yang Jinsong, who had committed suicide. They also found out about the director of the Linhai HDD Bureau, Shi Qinghai, and inexplicably uncovered a spy network of the anti-government army. However, Tai Ziyuan knew that the assassination attempt on him could not have been related to the anti-government army. Deputy Minister Yang could not have cooperated with the people in Green Dragon Mountain. The real mastermind was someone else. The government needed to find a scapegoat to answer to the Tai family. On the surface, the Tai family had no other evidence, so they could only accept the results of the government's investigation. However, the officials under the influence of the madam had already begun to investigate the remaining clues. When the investigation of the truth was gradually getting closer to the truth, there was a method to eliminate evidence and link. Zhang Xiaoming's death was undoubtedly a ruthless method of silencing. The afternoon sun in Jingzhou was still a bit hot. Tai Zhuan's usually pale face had 2 patches of red on it. It was probably due to the high temperature and had nothing to do with health. Like Su Lu beside him, after asking a question, he began to become silent. He squinted his eyes and stared at the blue sea where seagulls occasionally flew by. The girl in the blue dress at the Double Moon Festival ball was dead. A trace of complex emotions flashed through Tai Zhuan's eyes. If it wasn't for his family's insistence on investigating in secret and gradually threatening the other side, Zhang Xiaoming, who wasn't that important, but played an important role in the information of the assassination, should still be alive, right? Tai Zhuan thought this, but he didn't feel any guilt or heaviness in his heart. Although he wasn't old, he already had a calmness that people his age didn't have. The word calmness could also be called indifference in certain circumstances. Can the police find any clues? Su Lu, who had been silent all this time, finally opened his mouth and asked, "Although I know that things like politics are very dark, a Federation councillor committed such a crime. Is there no one who can punish him? Then what is the use of the Federation's laws?" Tai Zhuan's squinted eyes gradually opened. He glanced at Su Lu with surprise. He thought that Su Lu didn't know about Zhang Xiaoming's background and many of the details of this entire incident, so he didn't know how the other knew that Councillor Macklin was behind this. "I might know more than you think." Su Lu looked at the fine sand in his toes and said, "So I know who did this. The Federation's laws are very particular about evidence, and those politicians never leave behind any direct evidence that could be used against them." Tai Zhuan looked at Su Lu. After a long silence, he said in a serious tone, "The investigation of the militants directly led to the suicide of 7 officers of the 2nd Military Region. Even if the Federation can find some clues about this accident, I believe that it definitely won't be enough to send the culprit to court. What I am very curious about is why you are so sure that the culprit behind this is that Councillor Macklin. Logic, intuition, who will benefit from this?" Su Lu narrowed his eyes under the sunlight, his toes lightly squeezing the sand. He lowered his head and said, "He is already running for vice president. How can someone like this become the leader of the Federation? Without evidence, it is very difficult to do anything." Tai Zhuan said calmly, "If I have someone release this news, not many people in the Federation will believe it. His image has always been very good, and perhaps this will give him a chance to build momentum, portraying himself as an innocent politician who was framed by the 7 families. Councillor Macklin will definitely be very happy. I am wondering if you will also become this kind of politician in the future." At this time, Su Lu raised his head and looked seriously at Tai Zhuan. This pair of eyes was very calm, very honest, and very thorough. Tai Zhuan's expression became serious. After a while, he said very seriously, "Necessary means and compromises are all necessary, but I have my bottom line. I also have my bottom line. It is just that I am a small figure and you are a big figure. When a small figure's bottom line is broken, he can only be angry, but there is nothing he can do." Su Lu lowered his head and said, "I know that you still remember that you still owe me a life. If possible, I hope that you will do your best to prevent that councillor from being successfully elected. This way we will be even." Tai Zhuan looked quietly at Su Lu, the only friend in his life, the young man who had unhesitatingly stood in front of him at a time of danger and saved his life. After a moment of silence, he said, "Our family's business partner is Councillor Pabre. I believe that Shi Qinghai has already told you. Since that is the case, whether you ask for my help or not, I will do my best to prevent him from succeeding." Su Lu raised his head, looked at him, and said, "Thank you. What do you plan to do from now on?" Tai Zhuan suddenly asked, "Continue to study at Yue University?" "No, although I haven't decided yet, I don't want to go back to Yue University." Su Lu put his feet into the slightly hot white sand. After a moment of silence, he said, I met you in university, I met Shi Qinghai, and I met Zhang Xiaoming. But now that you are leaving, Shi Qinghai has already left, and Xiaoming has left completely. I think that it is time for me to leave as well. Tai Ziyuan's face didn't show any surprise. Su Li's choice had long been within his calculations. He looked at Su Lu and said, "If you don't mind, I can arrange it for you." The Tai family was the most low-key of the 7 families in the Federation, but also the most unfathomable. If they wanted to arrange a person's future, that person's future would be incomparably bright and brilliant. If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't refuse. However, Su Lu didn't even think about it. He directly smiled and said, "Thank you, but no need." This answer was also within Tai Ziyuan's expectations. He was more curious about what reason Su Lu would use to refuse him. "I saw a supervisor of the Black Hawk Security Company in that base. According to Shi Qinghai's analysis, he should be someone that the Tai family has had their eyes on for a long time." Su Lu looked into Tai Ziyuan's eyes and said, "You are destined to do great things in the future, so you have already started to train many capable assistants. If I accept your help, I will definitely become your subordinate in the future." Tai Ziyuan slightly frowned and looked at him. He said, "A person living in this world must have his own goals and find the meaning of his existence. And to achieve those goals, you must obtain more resources and be able to enter a certain class faster. For you, there is no doubt that this is a better choice. The problem is, I don't know where my life goals are." Su Lu laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "And what I don't like most about you is that from time to time, you show an attitude that can decide other people's lives." Tai Ziyuan touched his nose. His expression was not good, not only because of Su Li's words, but also because he found that Su Li's attitude of rejecting him was very firm. "Don't refute me. That is a kind of pride that comes from the bones." Su Lu lay on the beach chair, narrowed his eyes and looked at the waves. He said, "I am a very quiet person, but in fact I am a very proud person. I can talk to you like this now because I am your friend. If I was destined to be your subordinate in the future, it would be impossible for us to talk like this. If I followed in your footsteps, perhaps I could quickly become a top person in this society, but you should know that my life since I was young was not very happy. I don't have a good impression of the class you are talking about or even the Federation. Don't say these words in front of me." After a long silence, Tai Ziyuan said, "I have to remind you, don't be influenced by Shi Qinghai and Zhang Xiaoming's deaths, and become a fanatic." "I only become talkative in front of you guys," Su Lu said. "As for the anti-government forces, I think you are mistaken about something. I am just a very ordinary young man, but I am very lucky or very unlucky to meet you. Sometimes I also think whether meeting you is good luck or bad luck." Tai Ziyuan said with a smile, "If it wasn't for you, the officers of the 2nd Military Region wouldn't have known that I would appear in the stadium. But if it wasn't for you, perhaps I would have died several times." Tai Ziyuan raised his hand and stopped Su Lu from speaking. He said, "But you are not an ordinary person, you just don't want to admit it, or you don't have this self-awareness." Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the setting sun. After hearing this sentence, his heart suddenly trembled a little. He knew that Tai Ziyuan could not know the secret of his body, but he still thought of the structure diagram in his mind, the fake chip behind his neck, and his back was a little stiff. The director of Black Hawk Security Company, Xue Nain. Tai Ziyuan looked back at the forest behind the beach. Under the light of dusk, the forest was gorgeous as if it was burning. "He can't forget about you. Although there is no video of the battle in the underground parking lot, this former military special forces soldier insists that your past must be very complicated. And that national idol, if you are really a very ordinary person, how could she have gone to see you twice?" Tai Ziyuan said with a smile. "Even earlier. Think about how we met." At this time, You must have guessed that the access to the H1 area is very high, but you were able to enter. There is one thing I haven't asked you. Tai Xuan looked at Su Lu, who had a serious expression. After being rejected, his mood improved slightly. He asked very carefully, "How did you meet Professor Jean?" Professor Jean? Su Lu was confused. However, Tai Xuan thought that he was playing dumb. He forced a smile and did not pursue the matter. Instead, he said, "Everyone has their own secrets. Since you are not willing to tell me, I won't ask any more. Besides, I will help you keep this secret. I really don't know any Professor Jean. This kid is still pretending." Tai Xuan was somewhat gloomy and looked at him unhappily. Not long ago, the First Academy's laboratory had sent back a second report. In that report, it was pointed out that, if the experimental data were not wrong, then the reaction speed of the person operating the mecha was much faster than the average person. Meanwhile, the First Academy's ace student, Zhou Yu, who had once sparred with Su Lu in the mecha combat room, was the focus of the Tai family. During the other's first contact with the Tai family's subsidiary companies, he had also been asked this question. Zhou Yu had given the pilot who had operated the black prototype mecha very high praise. This outstanding student of the First Military Academy's mecha department had pointed out without hesitation that the pilot who had walked away with a belly full probably had not been in contact with mecha operation training for long, but his potential was unbelievably huge. He could even be called a true genius. Having eaten Su Li's countless midnight snacks in the H1 area, Tai Xuan naturally knew better than anyone else when Su Lu had first started to interact with mecha. He also knew how astonishing the other's rate of improvement was, so he did not doubt this information at all. If he was just a genius mecha operator, perhaps Tai Xuan would not have paid so much attention to Su Lu. His relationship with Su Lu was not bad, but that was only a personal relationship. Once it involved official business, this successor of the Tai family would return to absolute calm. He just felt that this person Su Lu still had many abilities, many secrets that had yet to be unearthed. Professor Jean had been missing for so many years, and yet he had thrown such a person back to Yue University. No one would believe that this person did not have any abilities. "I don't want to force you." Tai Xuan looked at Su Lu and said, "If I tell Mother that you are Professor Jin's student, I think that no matter how much you hate the so-called class I belong to, you will not be able to leave because she will definitely fly over immediately." Su Lu was stunned. He did not understand why this matter would involve Tai Xuan's mother, the madam who truly controlled the Tai family, and why she would value that Professor Jean so much, but he really did not know who Professor Jean was, so he could only smile silently. He knew that Tai Xuan would definitely not speak carelessly, so this Professor Jean must really exist, and was somehow related to him. His mind began to work quickly, thinking endlessly. In Tai Xuan's eyes, this silence was seen as Su Li's tacit agreement and concession. He shook his head and sighed, "This world has always been unfair. Why must you be so stubborn?" At this moment, Su Lu was still thinking about Professor Jean, the H1 area, and the access rights to the chip. The past scenes in his mind gradually linked together, allowing him to think of a certain possibility. His expression could not help but become serious. After being startled by Tai Xuan's words, he was silent for a moment and then said, "You still don't believe me. I just don't want to be your subordinate, because my friends are very few now. What should I do next? I will enter a relatively large motor company, and I hope to get into the research and development department, so that I can work in a job that I like." Su Lu looked at the horizon with a calm expression, watching the gradually setting sun and the bright red light that reflected in a straight line, and said, "Of course, if the Shell Motor Company can recruit me, who has no qualifications, then that would be even better." This was Su Li's dream since he was in the Donglin district. However, at this moment, Su Lu was thinking more about the promise he had made to Zhang Xiaoming. He would enter a big company, earn a good salary, buy a house, and then he would quietly watch the presidential election. He would see if there was such a thing as justice and morality in this world. That's it? Tai Zhuan, who had been quietly listening to the side, suddenly laughed, then shook his head and said, I wanted to do something for you, but now it seems that I can't do anything. Su Lu also laughed and said, If a young master like you doesn't want to owe anyone a favor, then you can give me that black car. That day in the underground parking lot, I felt that car was extremely sturdy. I'm really curious about the structure inside. That's not a problem, Tai Zhuan said. Then what is your dream? Your family background is too good, as if everything is prepared for you. Don't tell me you really want to be the president in the future? Su Lu turned his head and looked curiously at Tai Zhuan's slightly thin cheek. Tai Zhuan's brows showed a faint trace of melancholy. He said, Everyone has their own dream. When I was young, my dream was, time gradually passed, and the sun gradually set. The sky above the sea was suffused with an extremely deep blue-black, like a large piece of dark green jade. Just as the two young people with completely different statuses were talking about life and dreams, the endless stars began to flash in the night sky. Everyone's position is different, so their specific dreams are also different. I want to completely eliminate the anti-government forces in Green Dragon Mountain. No matter what method I use, I must make these traitors unable to delay the Federation's advance. When his dream went from having a beautiful girlfriend to having a playmate that he could play with in the mud, to this type of category, Tai Zhuan's expression became serious. If it was another skinny young man who wasn't even 20 years old who said these words, it would only make the audience laugh until they collapsed on the beach. However, Su Lu listened seriously and silently. It was because he knew that the young man beside him might really be able to accomplish these things in the future. The threat of the Empire must be eliminated. The social contradictions within the Federation must be alleviated, and we must obtain a chance for peaceful development. However, these are all not my dreams. These steps are only the prerequisites for me to realize my dreams. Tai Zhuan raised his head to look at the sky. Looking at the countless stars in the sky, his face suddenly flashed with an extremely yearning expression. He slowly said, Where exactly should the Federation go in the future? In this day and age where certain types of energy are gradually lacking, the entire Federation seems to have already been lifeless for many years. Why is it that our dreams, our vision, always stop at things like power and wealth? That is because the vast majority of people don't have power or wealth. Su Lu didn't say these words out loud. It was because he could tell that Tai Zhuan's words right now were all extremely sincere. He followed Tai Zhuan's gaze and looked towards the sky. Right now, apart from the occasional glimmer of light in the ocean, there wasn't a single trace of light around the beach. This made the curtain of stars in the night sky above seem even more clear. The Federation's future should lie in the starry sky. Tai Zhuan stared at the curtain of stars for a long time, and then said with an extremely serious tone. In Hushi State University's library, Su Lu had also read many books on cosmic astronomy. He narrowed his eyes and looked towards the sky. He couldn't help but say softly, The Federation has now explored 74 planetary systems. It is said that the Empire has 16 planetary systems. The nearby space has already been completely explored. If we continue to head into the Silver Core, it is not something that current space technology can support. Under the gravitational field, the human body will always appear too weak. If we don't head into the Silver Core, why head outside? The universe outside is still very, very big. If we say that the war between the Federation and the Empire is because of resources, then in such a big world, why do we have to fight to the death for a fly in the corner of a wall? A hint of mockery appeared at the corner of Tai Zhuan's lips. and those politicians, families, merchants in the Federation. Even if their desires are bottomless, the universe is big enough to satisfy their ambitions. This is a beautiful idea, but naturally, it is also a very whimsical idea. After a moment of silence, Sulu said, "If we want to reach other planetary systems, we have to pass through the dark canopy. With our current endurance, we could have done it a long time ago. The problem is that without the star map and the mark of the self-generated space door, none of the exploration spaceships in the early days of the constitutional era could return." On the beach, in the night sky, among the countless stars, there was an area that was strangely devoid of stars. That area was the periphery of the Milky Way where the Federation was located. If humans wanted to go beyond the Milky Way and enter the real outer space, that path was the best choice because no matter which direction they set off from, they would encounter the obstruction of countless stars. However, it was precisely because that area had no mark that it swallowed countless spaceships of the Federation for tens of thousands of years that it was called the Dark Canopy. Tai Zuan looked at the darkness and the stars above his head and said regretfully, "It is said that in the past, there was once someone who really left this galaxy. There was once a star map in this world that led to the outer galactic world, but unfortunately, no one has ever found it. But, if someone before us was able to do it, why can't we do it?" "That must be a legend," Sulu shook his head and said, "using a legend as a foundation for your ideals, you're not much better than me." Having said that, he still felt a trace of respect for Tai Zuan. Looking at the sky full of stars, he subconsciously stroked the bracelet on his wrist and thought of the words engraved on the bracelet. "But it's an ideal after all. I don't want to be like most people in the Federation, sprinkling some salt on their ideals, drying them, and drinking them when they're old," Tai Zuan said. Sulu said with a smile, "Cured meat is indeed not as delicious as smoked meat." "You spilled the beans again." Tai Zuan lowered his head and looked at him with a faint smile. He said, "This is an old saying. Not many people in the Federation know what it means. In an era where you can only eat synthetic meat, no one will use salt, and no one will make smoked meat, unless they often eat wild meat. How can a person who often eats wild meat be an ordinary person?" Chapter 149. The weather of early spring did not make the flowers in the streets of the capital's special zone start to sway. The temperature of 30 degrees north latitude seemed to be still immersed in the memories of winter. There were only a few hurried pedestrians on the empty street. The center of the Federation was as solemn and monotonous as usual. Like the magnificent buildings on both sides of the street, it was difficult to feel close to it. The Special Zone West 12th Street was far away from the major departments of the government. It was quieter. This street gathered a few of the biggest companies in the Federation, but it was not as prosperous as the ones in Harbor City. There were also no bizarre 3D images showing off in all directions. The appearance of these buildings was ordinary and peaceful. There was a sense of grandeur as if one had seen the end of human history. At the corner of the street facing Charter Square, there was a building with a faint metallic luster, but it did not form a strong reflection of the sun. People who knew this company knew that these walls were all made with the latest technology in the Federation. It was currently the most efficient light-absorbing material. Sulu looked at the building in front of him that was close to zero light pollution. He narrowed his eyes and carefully counted the floors twice, confirming that it was the 47th floor. This boring action of counting floors was a way for him to calm his nerve. This was the first time in his life that he applied for, and the company he applied for was the most famous Shell Motor Company in the Federation. When Sulu was an apprentice who repaired household appliances in the operation room of the mine, entering the Shell Motor Company in the Federation was his life dream. For the aspiring young people in the Federation, the name Shell Motor Company had always been covered with a layer of dizzying brilliance. The Shell Motor Company was the biggest motor company in the Federation, representing the level of the entire industry. The status of this motor company was forged by both history and reality. The Jingnong brand high-energy battery that changed the lives of countless people in the Federation was the most amazing invention of this motor company many years ago. The Shell Motor Company followed human society into the constitutional era. With the growth of the Federation, it had developed into a big company. The company's business was extremely broad and involved in many fields, including cars, multi-purpose ships, spaceships, spaceport mechanical equipment, ground transmission systems. This motor company had a very arrogant slogan: "As long as there is metal, there will be a symbol of a fruit shell." These words were not false. Although the Federation's files had never been declassified, everyone, including the Empire, knew that the Shell Motor Company was involved in the development of the continuous series of mecha from the Type B of the Federal military. The military's space battleships were naturally inseparable from this company. Such a giant corporation affected many aspects of the Federation, but no one could truly know who this company belonged to. However, it was different from other family companies that did not disclose their information. The Shell Motor Company had always been at the forefront of all companies in terms of information disclosure. If such a huge company still wanted to play mysterious, whether it was the politicians or the ordinary citizens of the Federation, they would not be able to accept it. The reason why no one knew who the owner of the Shell Motor Company was because the structure of the Shell Motor Company's shares was very complicated. Other than the 30% shares that were taken over by the Federation Citizen Fund during the First Constitutional Court, there were also countless public welfare funds and private funds. The Federation Citizen Fund, which held 30% of the shares, was exercised by the Federation Management Committee. Other than that, the second largest shareholder was the Veterans Association, also known as the Veterans Association. However, the Veterans Association only held 1.4% of the shares. From this, it could be seen that the structure of the Shell Motor Company's shares was so complicated that it made one's hair stand on end. The reason for this situation was determined by history. A large company that could affect the foundation of the Federation would definitely be controlled by the Federation. However, how could those profit-seeking financial giants and the big families behind the scenes let go of such a fat piece of meat? After countless years of fighting, everyone realized that no one had the ability to swallow this company alone, which led to the current situation. The Federal Military and the Academy of Science also had acting shares in the Shell Motor Company. After the Federation Statistics Department's last precise calculation in the 41st year of the Constitutional Court, if the Federation Citizen Fund and the shares with military background were included, the Federation could control 41% of the Shell Motor Company's shares. The Statistics Department and economists believed that under the strict supervision of the relevant laws, as many as 3,000 shareholders insider trading was completely blocked. It was difficult to fundamentally change the complex ownership structure formed by history. Under this situation, even if the 7 big families of the Federation worked together, they would not be able to control the Shell Motor Company without alerting the Federation government. At this point, the Federation government was finally able to relax. Therefore, in name, the Shell Motor Company was a company that belonged to all the people of the Federation. The countless funds and private individuals that held scattered shares could only enjoy dividends and related rights. Before leaving the university town of Linhai, Su Lo had already submitted his electronic resume to a few well-known companies of the Federation through the Internet. At the end of the resume, he attached his transcript as an auditing student at UA University. At the same time, he also attached a recommendation letter written by Professor Zhou. When he asked Professor Zhou for help in writing the recommendation letter, Professor Zhou did not hesitate at all. This was because after only 1 year of study, The professor could clearly determine that Su Lu had a very precious intuition and sensitivity in the field of mechanical engineering, as well as very strong practical operating skills. The only thing that puzzled Professor Zhou was that since Su Lu was the person that Professor Jean had chosen, why did he not directly ask Professor Jean to introduce him to those big companies? Although Professor Jean had left S1 for many years, with his reputation in the industry, his students should have the qualifications to choose any company he wanted. The electronic resume had Su Li's citizen number attached to it. After the resume was submitted to a few of the big companies of the Federation, it was classified as a file that did not belong to the privacy protection regulations. It could be directly accessed by the Human Resources Department of these companies. Su Lu was not worried that these companies would find anything unusual in his file. After all, the fake chip behind his neck was used to play hide and seek with the Bureau of Proclamation. It was impossible for there to be any problems in the file. However, Su Lu did not have the slightest bit of confidence in the prospects of applying for the job. No matter how outstanding his transcript was at Yue University, he was only an auditing student after all. He did not even have a diploma. His resume before he enrolled was also somewhat laughable. If it was said that a retired soldier with a military background in mechanical engineering would have some sort of advantage when applying for a job in these big companies, his file clearly recorded that he was only a mine maintenance soldier squatting in the Donglin district. However, he did not know whether it was because of Professor Zhou's recommendation letter or some other reason. Not long after the resume was sent out, Su Lu received an electronic interview invitation letter from 3 companies. Su Lu did not hesitate to choose the Shell Motor Company. Therefore, at this time, he appeared in the Special Capital District, in front of this building. Where there is metal, there is a shell. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the row of small words in front of the building, as well as the Shell logo that was deeply engraved into the metal wall at the end of the words. He took a deep breath. The slogan in front of the Shell Motor Company's headquarters was more concise and more powerful than the slogan circulating among the people of the Federation. It seemed to have some sort of magical power. He finally confirmed that there was nothing inappropriate about his clothes and walked into the building. Could it be that Tai Zhuan guy helped me? Su Lu smiled bitterly. After the conversation on the beach, he had not seen Tai Zhuan again. Although these 2 young people were indeed friends in a sense, after all, the social class gap was too large, so it was impossible for them to contact each other as often as normal friends. Regarding the Linhai State Gymnasium assassination, the Federation government's investigation had come to an end. Originally, whether it was Shi Qinghai or Zhang Xiaoming, Su Lu would be noticed by the government and invited to tea by the Federation Investigation Bureau. However, because of Su Li's positive role in this incident and the strong suppression of the Tai family, Su Li's role in this incident had been sealed in a secret file. He successfully returned to the life of an ordinary person. Welcome to the Shell Motor Company. A sweet-looking female staff member at the front desk of the building confirmed Su Li's name and citizen ID number. She tapped on the light touchscreen and said with a smile, "The interview will be held on the 32nd floor, Section C. I hope everything goes well for you." The service attitude was very good. It did not seem like a giant company owned by the Federation at all. Su Lu was slightly stunned. He suddenly felt that it was ridiculous. It was as if he had returned to the Star Clubhouse and was discussing the service content and price with the lady at the front desk. He blinked hard and smiled at the lady at the front desk with some embarrassment. After taking the high-speed elevator to Section C on the 32nd floor, Su Lu did not line up. He was directly taken to a room by the staff member. This was not a special privilege. The HR department of the Shell Motor Company was conducting a second test. All the applicants had to go through 2 rounds of screening before the actual recruitment test. The first round was to filter their resumes, and the second round was to conduct an interview in the room. The deputy director of the 7th Department of the Shell Motor Company's HR department was a balding, middle-aged man. He looked at Su Lu, who had pushed open the door and entered. He then looked at the information and introduction on the light screen. He could not help but frown slightly. He was very dissatisfied with the work of his colleagues in the HR department. Even though UA University was the most powerful research institution in the 3 major systems other than the 3rd university, how could an auditing student be qualified for the research work of the Shell Motor Company? Even though he had a professor's recommendation letter and his academic record was not bad, the balding middle-aged man looked at the leader beside him with a questioning gaze. Then, he turned to Su Lu, who was sitting on the chair, and asked coldly, "I won't ask why you want to enter the Nutshell Mobility Company, and I don't want to express any opinions about your resume because that's not my job scope. I just want to ask you what you think about the name of our company. Why should our company be called the Shell Motor Company?" Chapter 150. The fruit shell is used to protect the delicate flesh of the fruit. And to humans, the function of a machine is like a layer of fruit shell. It protects the relatively fragile body of humans and allows them to survive in a harsh environment. I think the reason why the Shell Corporation named it Fruit Shell at the beginning was to tell every employee that the starting point and the ultimate goal of the research and development of the Shell Corporation was to satisfy the needs of humans. Machines, in the end, have to be based on humans. Su Lu naturally would not talk about how the human body was the most important machine during the interview, and that other things like mechas and battleships were just extensions. Perhaps this kind of argument was fresh, but fresh would definitely be unorthodox. He did not want to be treated like a fool by these chief examiners of the Human Resources Department. Hearing Su Li's answer, the bald, middle-aged examiner showed a slightly surprised smile on his face. It seemed that he was very satisfied with Su Li's understanding of the word fruit shell. Beside the bald chief examiner, the other chief examiner, whose eyes had been half closed all this time, slowly opened his eyes at this moment and looked seriously at Su Lu, who was sitting on the chair. "Not bad, you've passed the interview. Prepare for the real test later." The examiner looked at Su Lu thoughtfully and indicated that he could leave the room. Su Lu was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He did not expect that the so-called interview would end so quickly just by answering a simple question. After Su Lu left the room, the bald examiner respectfully said to the person beside him, "Director, what do you think of this candidate?" The examiner, who had been silent with his eyes closed, was the Human Resources Manager of the Shell Motor Corporation Engineering Department, Jose. Originally, the recruitment exam in the spring should not have startled a high-ranking human resources manager like him. However, because the engineering department had reached a certain impasse during this period of time, they really needed some fresh blood. Therefore, he specially made a trip back to the Shell Motor Corporation headquarters to listen in on the recruitment. Manager Jose randomly chose a room as if he was gambling on his luck. He did not expect to meet Su Lu. The company's culture isn't a secret. If you put in the effort, you should be able to guess the meaning of the shell. In the past, when we were recruiting, the correct answer rate for this question was 4%. Jose expressionlessly opened the screen in front of him and began to examine Su Li's information file. He continued, however, "I am very satisfied with this candidate's answer. Machines should be people-oriented. This was the highest philosophy that the founder of the Shell Motor Company, as well as the countless researchers that came after him, had always carried forward." What a pity! Jose finished reading Su Li's file at the fastest speed possible. He could not help but pat his wrist lightly, and a look of pity appeared on his face. He sighed and said, "He was born in the army, and he only studied under old Joe in your university for a year. Looks like this young man has no problems with his comprehension and diligence." It's a pity that he only studied for a year. The Federation's projects are as complicated as the stars. No matter how diligent he is, his basic knowledge is definitely not enough. No matter how strong his practical ability is, he is limited by his background and years of study. It is impossible for him to have satisfactory design potential. Although he said so, this person in the upper echelon of the Shell Motor Company did not immediately remove Su Lu from the list of candidates. There were no ready-made, outstanding engineers in the Federation. Even if it was an outstanding student who graduated from the mechanical engineering department of the 3 major military academies, after entering the Shell Motor Company, he would need to undergo several years of training before he could truly become a talent. Although Jose did not have high hopes for Su Lu, he vaguely thought that this retired soldier would be able to give him a surprise in the assessment later. Let's see how he performs first. As long as he can pass the baseline, keep him. After thinking for a while, Jose told the bald examiner beside him, if he doesn't pass, remember to leave his contact information. Then, persuade him to return to UA University and study under the professors there for another 2 years. The company will wait for the day when he is truly outstanding. The bald examiner was slightly stunned, but he agreed. He could not help but sigh at the luck of the candidate called Su Lu. Supervisor Jose, on the other hand, was only thinking that today's exam questions were personally set by those fellows from the engineering department. Out of the 100 or so applicants from various universities outside, perhaps only a dozen or so truly outstanding people would be able to pass the baseline, not to mention that young man who had only sat in for a year at UA University. The selection of resumes was the first round, and the interview was the second round. All the confident graduates from the Federation had submitted tens of thousands of resumes to the Shell Motor Company. After these 2 rounds, there were only a little more than 100 candidates left. Su Lu did not know about the recruitment process of the Shell Motor Company. He only felt that it was a little strange. Why did the interview end so quickly? In fact, this was because the person in charge of human resources from the engineering department was present in his room. Naturally, the decision was made faster. The examiners from the human resources department in the other rooms had done all the necessary procedures and made the candidates answer 17 questions consecutively. Walking out of the room, Su Lu was led to the resting area by the staff. He waited alone in the empty resting area for the next round of the exam to begin. He waited for a long time, but no one else came. Only then did he realize that he was the only exception in this round of the interview. It ended faster than anyone else. There was no one around and there was nothing to do. Su Lu sat on the metal chair by the window. He picked up a copy of the Shell Motor Company's internal technical journal from the small table beside him and began to kill time. Who knew that he would be engrossed in reading it? Although these internal technical journals did not involve any particularly high-end confidential technology, the articles published by the engineers of the Shell Motor Company, whether it was the whimsical design ideas, the meticulous logical inference, or the detailed and rich experimental data, all of them made Su Lu feel a sense of familiarity and aroused a strong interest in him. Once he was engrossed, he did not know how much time had passed. When he was awakened by the discussions around him, it was almost noon. The resting area was already filled with candidates who had passed the second round of interviews. Those who dared to confidently submit their resumes to the Shell Motor Company were mostly fresh graduates from the 3 major military academies. There were also a few students from the Capital University's Fine Arts Department. Although Linhai State's university town had the most universities in the entire Federation, the number of people who applied for the Shell Motor Company was the least. There was no doubt that the students who were able to pass the 2 rounds of the Shell Motor Company's screening were all outstanding young people. Outstanding young people often appeared to be more arrogant. A more appropriate way to express arrogance was silence. Furthermore, graduates from the 3 major military academies had basically received military-style education. They all had the demeanor of a soldier. Therefore, even though the resting area was filled with more than 100 people, it was still very quiet. The sounds of discussion were not too loud. After the candidates had all arrived, it was time for lunch. Sitting at the dining table of the Shell Motor Company's headquarters, the silence was gradually broken. Perhaps it was because the candidates found out that the Shell Motor Company's working lunch was so sumptuous. They were in a good mood and had more beautiful imaginations about their future prospects. Therefore, in groups of 3 to 5, they began to gossip and express their worries about the official examination in the afternoon. Sulu occasionally spoke a few words with the people at the same table. Most of the time, he was still silent. However, on his plain and simple face, there was always a friendly smile, so no one expressed dissatisfaction with his silence. Because the Shell Motor Company belonged to the military, if graduates from the 3 major military academies were able to enter the Shell Motor Company, it was equivalent to entering the military's research institute. They could still count their military service, which was another form of military service. These outstanding graduates who were determined to enter the Shell Motor Company were divided into 3 groups according to the 3 major military academies. Sulu happened to be in the group of the 1st Military Academy. After listening to the gossip for a long time, he suddenly asked, "It seems like there are no graduates from the West Woods Military Academy." For Sulu, besides the glory of the charter, what he was most worried about was the few soldiers who had seen his true face in the East Woods region. It was because of this worry that in the past year, he had never tried to call the number on the business card. Occasionally, he would think of Little Watermelon, but he had never contacted her. The West Woods Military Academy was under the jurisdiction of the 4th Military Region. Sulu was willing to see people from the 4th Military Region in the Shell Motor Company, but after confirming that there were no problems, he felt that it was a little strange. After graduating from the West Woods Military Academy, most of the students will enter the Ancient Clock Company. After all, that company's headquarters is in the West Woods region, said a serious-looking graduate from the 1st Military Academy. After saying thank you, Sulu fell silent again. He quietly listened to the young people at the table exchange their experiences in school and interviews. At the same time, he guessed whether the formal assessment in the afternoon would be more focused on design or practice. "You look young. Which university did you graduate from?" A person beside him suddenly asked. "UA University, but I didn't get a diploma. I was an auditing student," Sulu replied. "Auditing student? How many years have you studied?" "More than a year." As soon as he said this, the whole table fell silent. It was not unusual for a graduate from UA University to enter the Shell Motor Company, but how could an auditing student who had only studied for a little more than a year be so thick-skinned as to participate in the recruitment of Nutshell? The graduate from the 1st Military Academy frowned and glanced at Sulu. He was very puzzled as to how Sulu had passed the first 2 rounds of the assessment. Today, this cafeteria was specially opened for the examinees. The sound of discussion gradually filled the cafeteria. An auditing student from UA University had entered the final round of the examination. This fact made all the examinees feel that it was inconceivable. Apart from that, the outstanding graduates of the 3 major military academies felt a trace of shame. Yes, it was a humiliation. No one would humiliate Sulu in front of his face, but the silence and cold gazes had already expressed their disdain and contempt. Sulu seemed to be unaware of it. He smiled slightly and didn't care at all. He left the table and walked towards the door. At the door, another young man who had just left the table happened to walk side by side with Sulu. That young man looked at Sulu thoughtfully and asked, "May I ask, what were you doing before you entered UA University?" "After I left the army, I went to Linhai. Mechanic Officer Wei Peixing." No, I was a squatting soldier, Sulu replied with a smile, but his feelings were somewhat complicated. This was because he recognized this young man beside him. He knew that this young man was the most outstanding student from the first military academy. However, he didn't understand why this young man didn't join the army directly, but instead came to Nutshell to apply. My name is Zhou. I have a feeling that this afternoon's assessment shouldn't be a big problem for you. That young man smiled and extended his hand towards Sulu. Sulu shook his hand. He really wanted to tell the other that he knew him, and that they had once had a fierce fight in the mecha combat room. I realized that I really love to smile slightly and not care at all. Fan Wei's style is really great. Chapter 151. Scammer. What do you think is wrong with this world? We worked so hard under the whip of the demonic instructor for 4.5 years, while others only need to serve 1.5 years of military service, then attend some *T university for another 1.5 years, and then sit in for the exam with us. He's probably good at fixing electrical appliances. Even the 37 cross-sectional diagrams of a mecha's central chip could turn that kid into an idiot. Zhou quietly looked at Su Li's back as he disappeared into the corridor. His expression did not change at all when he heard the discussions and disdainful comments around him. 5 years of life in the military academy had given this outstanding military cadet excellent self-discipline and self-control, which was why he could be so calm. In preparation for the invasion of the Empire, the Ministry of National Defense had started implementing a comprehensive talent plan a few years ago. The outstanding graduates of the 3 major military academies would undergo training and work in various large mobile companies before they officially entered the military. Zhou, who should have started as a junior officer in the military, was also part of this comprehensive talent plan. The Shell Motor Company, which had a strong military background, was naturally the first choice for this plan. However, the board of directors of the Shell Motor Company was still an independent existence from the government, so the implementation of this comprehensive talent plan was not based on the will of the officials of the Ministry of National Defense. The graduates of the 3 major military academies still had to go through the Shell Motor Company's independent assessment. Zhou was the trump card of the first military academy, and had an extremely high prestige among his classmates. When he left the dining table, the graduates of the first military academy put down their plates at the same time and followed his footsteps, thus overhearing his conversation with Su Lu. Don't bother with that idiot. Zhou, during the assessment in the afternoon, you have to give your brother a hand. Piloting a mecha is not a problem, and memorizing the circuit diagrams is fine too. If you really want to do some empty design, I don't have the brains. Hearing the word, idiot, Zhou turned around and stared coldly at Enda beside him. This brainless first military academy student was his good friend, but at this moment, Zhou could only think of the trip to Yue University half a year ago. Enda had piloted a blue and black mecha and had been beaten into an idiot by a certain black M-type mecha. When the first military academy had visited Yue University, Zhou had once had a simple conversation with the pilot of that mysterious black mecha in the mecha combat room. He had always remembered the way he had operated that black mecha. He also remembered that person's voice very clearly. Therefore, when Su Li's voice rang out in the cafeteria earlier, Zhou keenly noticed this and specially left the table early to say a few words to Su Lu. After a few words, Zhou confirmed a fact. This auditing student from Yue University was the operator of the black mecha. If I were you, I wouldn't be too arrogant in front of that Su Lu guy. Otherwise, you'll have to dig a hole and hide in it in the future. Zhou stared into Enda's eyes and said, "Don't say I didn't warn you. During your internship, you also went to the basement of the Shell Motor Company. You know that it's all alloy down there. I'm just worried that you won't be able to dig it up." As soon as this was said, The students surrounding Zhou Yu couldn't help but burst into an uproar. They didn't understand why Zhou Yu would have such a high opinion of that person, and they couldn't believe it in their hearts. Zhou Yu looked at the expressions of the surrounding students and said with a half-smile, "If you guys don't believe me, we can make a bet. In this afternoon's assessment, he will definitely pass the baseline." For an auditing student from a private university to be able to operate a prototype mecha and fight him to a draw, what kind of understanding of mecha did this require? Zhou Yu thought. The baseline of 60 points seemed to be really difficult. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the questions on the holographic screen in front of him. His fingers subconsciously drew together and turned slightly, as if he was transferring a primitive cross-shaped tool knife. Every time he was in some kind of difficult situation, he would always do this subconscious action. There weren't many questions on the holographic screen, only 3 pages in total. Su Lu started from the first question, and by the time he reached the 4th question, he had already started to feel the difficulty. Just as the HR manager of the Shell Motor Corporation Engineering Department had predicted, Su Lu, who had only been an auditing student at UA University for a year and had memorized all the previous M37 series mecha blueprints in Section H of the library, had never received a proper academy education, so he was very unfamiliar with these systematic knowledge questions. The Shell Motor Corporation was a company with a strong military background. Although all the professors of the mobility department acknowledged that the design, manufacturing, and repair of mecha covered most of the fields of machine construction in the entire Federation Society, the scope of the recruitment exam couldn't be entirely limited to questions related to mecha. The scope of the subjects covered was very broad. Su Lu memorized those formulas very well, and those parameters were also deeply engraved in his mind, impossible to forget. The problem was that UA University was a private university after all. There was a lot of high-level information from the Federation that he had never come into contact with, especially subjects like fluid dynamics and second-order physics, which were rarely used by private mobile equipment, were even more blank in his mind. The Federation's educational resources were already moving in the direction of fairness as much as possible, but due to the difference between a private university and a military academy, there was a lot of information that could only be accessed by the 3 major military academies. Take mecha blueprints, for example. A typical private university definitely wouldn't have them. Section H of UA University's library had all the previous M37 series blueprints. This was already very impressive, but what about after the M37 series? The working principle of the rear-wheel auxiliary steering system can't be used in which type of self-propelled equipment? How much of a loss of balance will the servo motor installed 12 centimeters outside the beam cause? Under the environment of deep-sea volcanic rock at a depth of 13,000 meters, what material should be used to achieve the highest cost-performance ratio for the pressure-resistant cabin? XWD platform. Under the illumination of level 10 units of light, the trend of the electron transition of the crystal ore is as follows. The questions on the first 2 pages already covered more than 10 research directions related to engineering. Although they were all objective questions, to answer these questions, one had to grasp first-hand information and systematic analysis. These were the things that Su Lu currently lacked the most. His finger lightly tapped on the holographic screen, but his eyebrows were furrowed even tighter. Although it was a little strenuous, Su Lu didn't feel the slightest sense of defeat. This was a possible situation that he had already thought of before he applied for the job. Uncle Feng Yu and Professor Zhou both thought that he was a genius in mechanical engineering, but mechanical engineering was faced with material objects and leaned more towards practice. On the other hand, the Shell Motor Company's recruitment of R&D personnel leaned more towards theory, and his theoretical knowledge couldn't possibly be more complete than those outstanding officers of the 3 academies. The 20 objective questions were finally finished. Su Lu gently exhaled and wiped the sweat on his forehead. Some of the questions, especially those related to material science, were basically not difficult for him. In the operation room of the Donglin district's mine pit, in order to repair those ordinary household appliances, Uncle Feng Yu had obtained so many materials from God knows where. After years of nurturing, Su Lu now had a natural sense of touch when it came to materials. However, some of the questions really gave him a headache. After calculating the questions on the first 2 pages, Su Lu found that he could only guarantee that he could answer 2/3 of the questions correctly. He silently calculated for a moment. If the next holographic screen question was still of this difficulty, then he would just barely pass the baseline. Su Lu slightly relaxed. His finger lightly tapped on the holographic screen, and the last question of the Shell Motor Company recruitment exam appeared in front of his eyes. It was indeed the last question, because the holographic screen on the last page was completely clean. There was only one question and one blueprint. Su Lu was slightly taken aback, and a trace of nervousness flashed through his eyes. This was because what he was most worried about now were the subjective questions. There was only one question on the last page, and it actually took up 40 minutes. It was clearly a difficult question. If this question involved the design and deduction of some modern military mecha, how could he have found a feasible direction in such a short amount of time? Narrowing his eyes, he stared unblinkingly at the blueprint on the holographic screen. The nervousness in Su Li's eyes disappeared, replaced by vigilance and a strong sense of unease. His face also gradually paled, because he had discovered something that made him very uneasy. This blueprint looked somewhat familiar. This was not the blueprint question on the blank piece of paper Jian Shuer had left in the hospital, but there seemed to be some vague similarities. For the past few days, Su Lu had been troubled by the abnormal electrical discharge in his cerebral cortex and the bizarre and variegated images that would appear in his eyes from time to time. Now that he saw the familiar blueprint, his thoughts involuntarily returned to that annoying night. This blueprint should be a blueprint for the power transmission of some kind of large-scale equipment. However, it was different from the blueprint that Jian Shuer had forgotten in the hospital. It was not a power source, but a more powerful instantaneous energy output device. The question required the examinee to find a few mistakes in the blueprint and make changes based on their own understanding to ensure that the instantaneous energy output of the device was stabilized within a certain power range. Su Lu had no idea what this device was. He could only guess the nature of this device based on the data given in the question. He studied it seriously for a long time, and vaguely grasped some sort of clue. The key to this question should be at the bottom left of the blueprint, where the control of the maximum lateral G value of the electron jet was. However, the problem was, although he knew how the electron jet worked, he had never seen the actual thing, not even a three-dimensional analysis diagram. He silently stared at the blueprint on the holographic screen. His face became paler and paler, and a drop of cold sweat began to seep out of his forehead. In the recruitment exam meeting room, there was a sense of disappointment. It seemed that the outstanding students of the third college did not have much confidence in such a complicated question. Some students even consciously began to leave the exam hall. Su Lu continued to stare at the holographic screen in silence. His fingers gently rubbed together, and his eyes gradually narrowed. The students who gradually left the exam hall, as well as the staff of the motor vehicle company, gradually noticed the pale-faced young man at the back. In a mythical story about the time before the catastrophe, there was once a powerful person who said, "I want light, so there was light in this universe." The silent Su Lu stared at the blueprint on the holographic screen and silently said in his heart, "I want the three-dimensional analysis diagram of the electron jet." Chapter 152. Gradually, more and more examinees left the conference room. These youngsters politely maintained their silence outside the room. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, they watched their peers in front of them. However, when they saw the slightly pale, motionless youth at the back, some of their eyes flashed with amusement and mockery. For the last major question, these examinees could only try to answer it tentatively based on the little understanding they had in class. They were all very outstanding students. They knew that even if they sat in front of the light screen for a few more hours, they would not suddenly be enlightened. Thus, they could only leave the conference room. However, that audit student who had been a squatter was actually still sitting in front of the light screen, motionless. At this time, there were not many students who were still in the conference room seriously thinking about the last blueprint. They were all people like Zhou Yu. Su Lu, whose face was slightly pale, stared silently and strenuously at the light screen. When this scene fell into the eyes of the students from the 3 military academies, they naturally did not think that Su Lu was seriously thinking about how to solve the problem like Zhou Yu and the others. Su Lu did not move. His face was slightly pale, and beads of sweat could even be seen on his forehead. The examinees outside the conference room naturally thought that this guy definitely did not understand the question, but stubbornly refused to leave. He was afraid of losing face and was currently caught in a dilemma. Some people sympathized with this pitiful squatter, but even more people looked at Su Lu in the corner with a mocking and contemptuous gaze. In their opinion, since he didn't have this kind of standard, he shouldn't have come here to make a fool of himself. Su Lu, who had been silent for a long time, finally moved. He raised his finger and enlarged the blueprint on the light screen to its maximum. Then, he moved it to a complex structure on the lower right side. Then, he fell silent again. He narrowed his eyes and stared there without blinking. It was impossible for anyone to notice that in the air before his eyes, the pictures caused by the abnormal discharges in the cerebral cortex were flashing non-stop. The three-dimensional analysis of the electron jets was flashing non-stop like a slideshow, and it was being compared with the drawings on the light screen that had been magnified to the maximum. With the ready-made blueprint as a reference, Su Li's train of thought became much clearer. To solve the control of the maximum lateral G value of the electron jet, the key was the string of chip connections that could affect the acceleration curve of the SD direct injection. His train of thought had been confirmed, but Su Lu still did not start to solve the problem. Instead, he quickly began to perform those virtual calculations in his mind. This was an extremely vague, even intuitive calculation because it was very unfortunate that the Shell Motor Company's assessment gave too little time, and there was no large-scale computer as a tool. It was impossible to complete the massive amount of calculations needed to complete the actual design. Therefore, Su Lu could only follow this train of thought and come up with a solution. He squinted his eyes and looked at the 2 blueprints in front of him and began to look for a place to start. The problem was that this unknown large-scale device was already an extremely complete closed system. If he wanted to modify the chip connections of the electron jet, it would inevitably affect the rest of the system. In other words, if he solved the problem according to Su Li's train of thought, then he would not only face the problem of modifying the electron jet, but also the entire structure diagram. Modifying the structure of a complete system required countless workers, a lot of time, and countless experiments to complete. Even if it was only a conceptual design change, it still required a lot of work. The most important thing was that for these candidates, they had already been taught a certain way of thinking by academic education. No one would have thought that a recruitment exam question would require candidates to use such a crazy way of thinking to solve it. Su Lu did not have this kind of fixed way of thinking. For mechanical and electronic systems, he still maintained the idea of repairing electrical appliances. After following Uncle Feng Yu for so many years, this idea had long been deeply ingrained in his mind. In his opinion, no matter how high-level a system was, it was actually not much different from the simple chipsets on electrical appliances. At most, it was just a little more complicated. This kind of crazy idea made Su Li's way of thinking different from others. He did not know that this structure diagram was the activation device of a certain type of battleship in the Federation. Even if he knew, the idea in his mind would not have the slightest hesitation. Uncle had said before that only the human body was the first-order machine. The rest were all boring combinations of metal and wires. There was no essential difference. The structure diagram that was enlarged to the maximum on the holographic screen had long been moved from the position of the electron jet to another position. In Su Li's mind, or rather in front of his eyes, the blueprints flashed like a slideshow. He did not know how many of them had been changed. Moving one part would affect the overall situation. Fortunately, the blueprints in his field of vision were like a database. Following his strong will, an unlimited number of structural models were constantly moved and compared with the structure diagram on the holographic screen. Su Li became more and more familiar with this process. He faintly thought that he should have some kind of terrifying ability. His heart was excited, but his face was still calm. His face was slightly pale, and he narrowed his eyes as he stared at the holographic screen in front of him. The time for the examination to end was not yet up. Most of the examinees had already left the conference room. Although some of them had calculated that the problem in the last question should be with the electron jet, no matter how they calculated, they found that they could not change that part of the design without destroying the precision of the entire system. Therefore, they began to think that they had gone in the wrong direction. For this kind of large-scale equipment system, if a new design was to be made, it was not something that could be done by a single department. Naturally, it could not be the main point of the examination. Therefore, the last examinees to leave the conference room turned their thoughts to the rest of the structure diagram. A few of them successfully caught some problems and made the corresponding changes. Although they still could not meet the requirements of the examination, it was already very difficult. Zhou Yu was the second last examinee to leave the conference room. He frowned slightly, clearly dissatisfied with the changes he had made to the last structure diagram. However, he knew that he had done the best he could. Walking out of the conference room, he came to Enda's side. Following Enda's mocking gaze, Zhou Yu looked into the conference room and saw the slightly pale Su Li. He could not help but ask in confusion, "He still hasn't come out?" The objective questions can be guessed, but I'm afraid he can't even understand the last question. Enda lowered his voice and sneered. "We came out early and kept seeing that guy staring at the holographic screen in a daze like a fool." His face was so scared that it turned white. Zhou Yu frowned. He kept feeling that things should not be like this. He had a confidence in that guy called Su Li that even he himself did not understand. In the office beside the conference room, the supervisor of Shell Motor Corporation Engineering Department, Jose, who had just interviewed Su Li in the morning, carefully looked at the answers of the examinees sent over on the holographic screen. In the end, his gaze fell on Su Li's answer. He could not help but say regretfully, "It seems that this young man's basic knowledge is much better than I thought. He could pass the baseline at the beginning, but the last question was really too difficult for him. He could not have seen this kind of system structure before." It was almost time to hand in the exam. On Su Guang's exam paper, the last holographic screen was still blank. Supervisor Jose could not help but shake his head. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed. He stared at the words and lines on the holographic screen and refused to look away. After a while, Jose's face was slightly red. He pointed at Su Li's answer on the holographic screen and kept tapping his finger. The examiner beside him saw his expression and could not help but worry. He asked, "What's wrong?" "Talent. Talent." Jose took a deep breath and looked at the holographic screen with a face full of smiles. He said, "The engineering department wants this person." The examiners around him curiously looked at the answers on their own holographic screens. After looking at it for a while, their expressions became extremely interesting. They did not expect that the auditing student who came from a squatting soldier background could actually write such an answer. They were very clear that the last question was a problem that the monster engineers from the engineering department had just solved 3 months ago. Because it involved military secrets of the Federation, these students had to sign a confidentiality agreement beforehand. In this recruitment exam, the Shell Motor Corporation did not expect these freshly graduated students to be able to solve this question. They only wanted to test the thinking of the candidates. And in front of them, this young man named Su Lu, although he could not solve this problem, the slightly rough changes to the blueprints and the notes at the bottom were all faintly moving in the right direction. This examinee seems to be very familiar with the main cannon base system. It's really incredible, the bald examiner hesitantly said, but there is still a big problem with the changes to the blueprints in the third region. What's there to be afraid of? Jose stared fixedly at the holographic screen and said loudly, "The key is this kid's thinking. It's really rare to see such a daring fellow nowadays." Su Lu sighed, put down the holographic marker pen in his hand, and walked out of the meeting room. As the end of the exam approached, he finally wrote down the design changes that he had compared and tested many times in his mind onto the holographic screen. The problem was that he still found many problems. Most importantly, in this short period of time, he could only make some vague changes to the concept, but he was still thousands of miles away from the requirements of the question. "How do you feel about the last question?" Outside the meeting room, Zhou Yu looked at him and asked with a smile. Previously, when he saw Su Lu start writing at the end, he had already vaguely guessed something. "It's too difficult, I can't finish it at all." Although Su Lu did not know that the other had already recognized him, from the start of the mecha battle, he had a good impression of this first academy's ace student. He answered honestly, "This kind of design change to a major system is not something I can handle. Even without the need for experimental data, just the design change alone will take at least a few months." Chapter 153. If you shut your mouth, no one here will treat you as a mute. Zhou Yu looked at Anda and uttered a famous Federation proverb. His calm gaze startled Anda. He scratched his head and obediently shut his mouth. "Since you are a student of your university, you must be studying under Professor Zhou," said Zhou Yu as he turned around and smiled at Su Lu. For some reason, Su Lu felt that the other party's gaze on him was a little strange. He had always thought that his face was very ordinary, but who would have thought that the other party would be able to recognize him just from his voice? After a few words, although Su Lu was not familiar with this ace student of the First Military Academy, he had gained a deeper understanding of him. He thought to himself that this person was able to obtain such respect and status among so many proud military students of First Military Academy. It seemed that it was not only because of his excellence, but also because of the aura he exuded through his speech and actions. At this time, all the examinees had already entered the meeting room. They were either nervous or calm as they waited for the final assessment result. Just like in the cafeteria, the 100 or so examinees were still divided into 3 groups according to the 3 major military academies. And because Su Lu was talking to Zhou Yu, he just happened to be sitting in the middle of this group of students from First Military Academy. The blonde examinee sitting in the first row is Park Ji-ho from the 3rd Military Academy. I heard that he flew over from District S3 a month in advance for the Shell Motor Company's spring recruitment. I wonder how he did today. Under the strange gazes of the surrounding students, Zhou Yu calmly introduced the examinee to Su Lu. He was indeed very interested in Su Lu. On one hand, it was because he had guessed that the other was that fellow with the strange mecha piloting ability. On the other hand, before he had left the school, the staff of the Xiao Shu Foundation, who had sponsored his studies for 4.5 years, had once asked him about the abilities of the black mecha operator from Yue University. In other words, Zhou Yu now knew that this auditing student, who had once been a trooper, had long since entered the sights of the Tai family management. He really wanted to try and get in touch with this kind of person. Park Ji-ho. Su Lu naturally did not know what Zhou Yu was thinking, so he replied casually. He's the A student of the mechanical department of the 3rd campus. Last year, during the Tri-College Exchange Conference, he once fought against me in the mecha combat room. In the end, the professors determined that it was a draw. When the topic of mecha combat was brought up, Zhou Yu looked at Su Lu with a hint of a smile in his eyes. Su Lu was slightly surprised, and his gaze turned towards the golden-haired candidate in the front row. Although he had not had much interest in mecha combat, his training in Area H1 had made him no stranger to mecha combat. In that mecha battle, he had fought to a draw with Zhou Yu beside him, but he knew very well that if not for that antique simulation system, if not for the mysterious power within his body, and if not for his excellent luck at that moment, he definitely would not have been able to hold on under the ferocious attacks of Zhou Yu's silver mecha. For that Park Ji-ho to be able to fight to a draw with Zhou Yu, he must also be quite a powerful character. Park Ji-ho is proud and arrogant, and is completely unwilling to admit that it was a draw. This morning, he already made an appointment with me. After entering the company, we will have a real mecha battle on the testing grounds. Zhou Yu looked at Su Lu and asked seriously, "Are you interested?" Hearing the first half of the sentence, Su Lu sighed internally. These outstanding students of the 3 major military academies were indeed full of confidence and pride. It looked like they had never considered that they would fail the assessment. However, when he heard the last sentence, his heart could not help but tighten. He narrowed his eyes at Zhou Yu, and after a long pause, he smiled and said, "I have never even seen a real mecha in my life." Zhou Yu saw that Ling Lan was unwilling to respond to his probing, but he was not in a hurry. After a moment of silence, he asked directly, "The last time I went to your university there was a black mecha." The smile on Su Li's face did not change, but his heart was growing more and more nervous. He did not know how the other party had connected him to that black mecha. Although he had already confirmed that the mysterious trembling power within his body could be perfectly concealed, and that even if someone found out that he was the pilot in that black mecha, there would not be any major problems, he still subconsciously felt somewhat uneasy. Fortunately, Zhou Yu's calm and questioning gaze did not put too much pressure on him and force him to admit anything. Because at that moment, a row of 7 examiners walked into the meeting room. The meeting room instantly fell silent. Su Lu let out a silent sigh of relief and shifted his gaze away. He noticed that the golden-haired examinee in the first row had finally raised his head at that moment. Right after that, he noticed that this row of examiners was surrounding a middle-aged man in the middle, and that middle-aged man looked somewhat familiar. It was the examiner Su Lu had interviewed with in the morning. He narrowed his eyes slightly at the middle-aged examiner, and could not help but feel a little surprised. It looked like the other party's status in the Shell Motor Company was not low. The human resources manager of the Shell Motor Company engineering department, Jose, used a cold gaze to sweep across the faces of the examinees in the meeting room. Unlike his gaze, his mood was actually quite good. The results of this spring recruitment exam had greatly exceeded his expectations. It looked like the all-rounder plan of the Ministry of National Defense was indeed not bad. The most outstanding graduates of the 3 major military academies had indeed performed much better than the previous examinees. Of course, the one who made him even more satisfied and gave him endless surprises was still the examinee he had personally interviewed. Among the 7 examiners, Jose's rank was, of course, the highest. However, he was still the human resources manager of the engineering department, and this recruitment exam was the responsibility of the head office's Human Resources Department. Therefore, the matter of announcing the results and arranging the research direction of the examinees who passed the exam was left to the other examiners. The recruitment of the Shell Motor Company was fundamentally different from the recruitment of other companies. However, the examinees who passed the recruitment exam would be directly assigned to different departments, and there was no collective training for new employees. On one hand, this was because the examinees recruited by the most famous company in the Federation were the most outstanding group of people, and they had to satisfy the company's requirements of being able to use them. On the other hand, the company had always believed that the training of new employees should be carried out in practice, and should not waste any time and money. Following the voice of the examiner with a serious expression, examinees left the meeting room dejectedly from time to time. These were all people who did not pass the exam. As for the examinees who passed the exam, they listened attentively to the department they would be assigned to. Although being able to enter the Shell Motor Company was already a very difficult matter, being assigned to the best and most important department was, of course, an even better thing. The examinees who did not know the results of the exam were extremely nervous as they waited. Among them, there were naturally some who were different. For example, the blonde examinee in the first row, Park Ji-ho, or the smiling Jo-yu, or Sulu. He was very clear that although he did not finish the last big question, he should have just passed the basic score. He only secretly wished in his heart that it would be best if he could enter the engineering department. This was because, within the Shell Motor Company, other than the Research Institute, the engineering department had the most access to the most advanced technology. A large part of the reason he wanted to enter the Shell Motor Company was because he wanted to get close to that information. Supervisor Jose glanced at his wristwatch and realized that the flight back to Hong Kong was getting closer. He gently patted the shoulder of the examiner in front of him and said a few words with a smile. Then, he stood in front of everyone. He stared at the examinees who were still sitting in the audience and said, "I am the Human Resources Supervisor of the Engineering Department, Jose." Hearing this sentence, there was a sudden commotion in the audience. These students from the 3 major military academies were very clear about the position of the engineering department in the Shell Motor Company. Other than the Research Institute, the engineering department should be the most advanced department. Originally, they did not expect to be able to enter the engineering department, but they did not expect that the human resources supervisor of the engineering department would be present in today's recruitment exam. What did this mean? I don't have much time, so I only have a few words to say. In today's recruitment exam, you all did very poorly. Only 7 people were able to pass the basic score. For those who passed the exam before, don't show the arrogance on your faces like you did in school. You all did not pass the basic score. The 7 examinees who passed the basic score, not bad. On behalf of the engineering department, I welcome all of you. The examinees in the meeting room were originally a little embarrassed, but after hearing this sentence, they could not help but become restless. They finally confirmed that the supervisor of the engineering department had personally come to the recruitment exam site to recruit people. All of the examinees wanted to enter the engineering department, so they all pricked up their ears, hoping that their names would come out from the supervisor's mouth. Even the examinees who had already been assigned to different departments were curiously watching. They did not know which lucky ones, or perhaps the most outstanding ones, would be chosen by the Shell Motor Company. The atmosphere in the meeting room was a little tense. Park Ji-ho, Jo-yu. After reading out the 6 names, Jose subconsciously paused for a moment. Jo-yu, whose name was called out, smiled. The blonde examinee in the first row relaxed his body, but frowned. It was obvious that he was not satisfied with Jo-yu's name being called out after his. The examinees in the meeting room were both surprised and not surprised to hear these 2 names. This was because the students from the three academies often interacted with each other. They were very clear that in this batch of students, Park Ji-ho from the three academies and Zhou Yu from the one academy were the most outstanding. They were curious about who the seventh name was. Could it be that his results were better than Park Ji-ho's and Zhou Yu's? But they heard that there were no outstanding people in this batch of students from the two academies. Jose smiled as he looked at the circle of people from the one academy. He said, "Su Lu." Once these words were said, the crowd was in an uproar. The students from the two academies in the front row could not help but stand up and turn to look at the circle of people from the first military academy. They wanted to see who this unfamiliar name was in the first academy. However, when they found out that the examinee chosen by the engineering department was actually the one they had previously mocked, Squatting Soldier, everyone's expressions became extremely interesting. The only one who was mentally prepared, Zhou Yu, could not help but be surprised. He smiled and patted Su Li's shoulder. Everyone in the circle of people from the one academy was already stunned, especially the boorish Anda. At this moment, his mouth was wide open, and he looked at Su Lu as if he was looking at a monster. He was speechless for a long time. Chapter 154. When the white-haired old man walked into the meeting room, dozens of examinees were still immersed in the shock of hearing Su Li's name. When they suddenly heard such a loud voice, everyone curiously looked over. They did not know why this old man who suddenly appeared in the Shell Motor Company's meeting room would shout out Su Li's name. Some of the examinees even started to wonder if Su Lu had cheated during the exam and was found out by the company. That's right, if he did not cheat, how could this auditing student pass the exam? His performance was even more outstanding than the best students in the third campus, and he was chosen by the human resources manager of the engineering department. Some of them even started to fantasize. If Su Lu was stripped of his qualifications and kicked out of the meeting room, would it be their turn to be on the list of 7 people? Seeing the white-haired old man who directly rushed into the meeting room, the examiners on the stage respectfully greeted him. Only the human resources manager of the engineering department, Mr. Jose, frowned and did not say a word. He glared fiercely at the bald examiner beside him. The bald examiner frowned and said, "Mr. Jose, the research institute has been short of manpower recently. Especially this person. He has been cursing in the Human Resources Department for the past 2 days. It's not that I deliberately revealed it, but he must have seen the results of the exam." At this time, an examiner introduced him to the examinees in the meeting room. "This is Professor Shen from our company's Research Institute." Hearing the words Research Institute, the examinees in the meeting room were dumbfounded. If the engineering department was the most advanced department in terms of technology in the Shell Motor Company, then the Research Institute was the cornerstone of the entire Shell Motor Company. For countless years, the Research Institute had provided the Shell Motor Company and the Federation with an endless supply of wisdom and research results. However, this high and mighty Research Institute had always signed cooperation agreements with professors from various universities. They had never heard of recruitment through the Human Resources Department. Why did this old professor suddenly appear in the meeting room? Who is Su Lu? Professor Shen from the Research Institute did not pay attention to the examiner's introduction. He also did not pay attention to Mr. Jose's gaze. He shouted at the examinees below the stage. Su Lu was confused. He stood up and raised his hand. "I am." Professor Shen looked at him, then looked at the printed test paper in his hand. He nodded with satisfaction and said, "Although your basic knowledge is a bit lacking, you can barely use it. You, come with me." This scammer called Su Lu was not only chosen by the engineering department, but he was also about to be recruited as a staff member of the Research Institute. This fact made the atmosphere in the conference room even more strange. Besides Su Lu, Zhou Yu revealed a look of shock. Su Lu opened his mouth slightly, not understanding what had happened. The gazes of the examinees in the meeting room all landed on him. Envy, jealousy, shock, suspicion, and all sorts of emotions were present. Park Ji-ho, who was sitting in the first row, was also staring at Su Lu. His slender eyes, which were partially covered by his golden hair, were filled with disbelief and jealousy. Professor Shen, who came from the Research Institute, said to the examiner from the Human Resources Department, "Help him with the procedures." At this moment Mr. Jose, who had been silent, finally could not help but say, "Wait. This examinee has already been chosen by the engineering department." Professor Shen looked at him and frowned. He said, "I need manpower for my research project. The few thousand engineers in your engineering department are not enough for you?" The engineering department is not the Bureau of Proclamations Human Resources Committee. We don't have extra people. Mr. Jose did not budge. The Research Institute wants people, and the engineering department wants them? Do you want me to go to the board of directors? This was only a small matter. Of course, it was not enough to alarm the Shell Motor Company's board of directors. However, Professor Shen was very confident in his words. After all, the Research Institute's position in the company was unshakable. The key is the examinee's own will. The board of directors cannot go against the wishes of the staff and arbitrarily transfer them, Mr. Jose said coldly. He then turned his head and said to Su Lu, "Don't be scared by the reputation of the Research Institute. Young people like you will want to transfer out in 3 days if you go to that kind of lifeless place. Also, I have seen Professor Zhou's recommendation letter. Your hands-on ability is the strongest. The engineering department is the most suitable department for you." At this moment, the people in the meeting room were dumbfounded. Especially the examiners on the stage, they could not help but smile bitterly. Who would have thought that this year's spring recruitment would actually alarm the two major departments in the company? The most important thing was that these two departments were actually fighting over a single examinee. What was the most expensive thing in the 37th century? Sure enough, it was a talent. At the side door of the Shell Motor Company, the young people who had just finished their exams waved goodbye. However, when they looked at the group of people in the first military academy, they could not help but feel a little complicated. This was all because of the guy standing next to Zhou Yu. The blonde Park Ji-ho slowly walked in front of the people from the first military academy. He first nodded slightly to greet Zhou Yu, then he stared at the ordinary-looking Su Lu. After a moment of silence he asked, "I still don't understand why the Research Institute and the Engineering Department have chosen you." Anda looked at this person with disgust and said gruffly, "You idiot! Of course it's because you did well in the exam." The students from the first military academy did not have a good impression of Su Lu. They had even mocked him at the beginning. However, under Zhou Yu's influence, their performance was much better than the other examinees. Anda felt that Su Lu was an awesome person, and he seemed to be Zhou Yu's friend. Of course, he would stand up and be a door god, and play the bad guy. After Park Ji-ho left, Zhou Yu smiled at Su Lu and said, "The bus back to school is waiting for us. Are you going the same way?" Su Lu shook his head. The two exchanged contact information and waved goodbye. When the side door returned to silence, he retracted his gaze from the street and walked into the automatic tunnel beside the flower bed. He walked towards the parking lot at the corner of West 13th Street. The parking lot in the basement of the Capital Special District was very clearly planned. Moreover, the parking lot was exceptionally large. It was the size of 5 football fields. Su Lu gripped the armrest tightly under the dim light. He felt a little strange in his heart. The bloody Mecca in the underground parking lot of Linhai Gymnasium had always been a rather depressing memory in his mind. The automatic caterpillar tunnel carried his body forward in the parking lot. He narrowed his eyes and thought, when was the last time he played football? It seemed to be 6 or 7 years ago at the back of Zhonglo Street. He played with Weizi and the others. Ever since he met Uncle Feng Yu and started to repair home appliances, he never played again. When he arrived at the H section of the parking lot, Su Lu pressed the key in his hand. Not far away, a black car automatically ignited and let out a soft welcoming sound. He glanced at the H section above the parking lot and could not help but smile. He thought of the young man he met in the H section. The black car had no logo. It was a gift from Tai Zhuan to Su Lu before he left. After sitting in the car, Su Lu did not immediately leave. Instead, he silently closed his eyes and began to think about what happened at the Shell Motor Company today. Leaning against the comfortable seat, Su Lu closed his eyes as if he was about to fall asleep. Entering the Shell Motor Company, on one hand, was because this was his dream and the future he had promised to someone. More importantly, it was because he needed to solve some problems that were very troubling to him. The images in his mind were too strange. There were many blueprints that he did not know the purpose of. Today, during the exam, he found a very similar blueprint, which made him more determined. He had to figure out the strange things that were happening in his body as soon as possible. He had to figure out what was going on with that strange black dream. If these things were related to the chip behind his neck, then he had to figure out the secret of this camouflage chip. The best places in the Federation in this area were the Federal Academy of Science and the Shell Motor Company. His performance today and the sensation he caused were completely different from his usual style of doing things. This was because he knew that in a top company like the Shell Motor Company, with his ability, there was no need to talk about hiding. In order to climb up the ranks among countless outstanding peers, in order to possibly come into contact with the core technology of the Federation in a very short period of time, he had to fully utilize his ability. Only technology could be used to get close to technology itself. It was also because of this reason. Although the Human Resources Director of the Engineering Department patiently explained the pros and cons of the two in the office, as well as the problems of the Research Institute, he still chose to follow Professor Shen into the Research Institute. After all, the research of the Shell Motor Company in the field of microchips was recognized by the Federation as second to none. Su Lu knew that he had some talent in the field of mechanical repair, and in the few years he had followed Uncle Feng Yu, he had unknowingly grasped a lot of knowledge about high-end equipment in the Federation from the process of repairing home appliances. But he also knew that if the Black Dream didn't leave him with so many strange blueprints, he definitely wouldn't have been able to solve the last question in today's exam. Thinking of this, he opened his eyes. His eyes revealed a trace of reminiscence. His right hand subconsciously touched the back of his neck. Although his finger didn't feel any protrusion, he knew that there was an extremely small chip underneath. "Uncle is the truly awesome person," Su Lu exclaimed in his heart. He always thought that the blueprints that appeared in front of his eyes due to the abnormal discharge of his brain were the information that Uncle left in the chip. Although he didn't understand how so much information could be integrated into a microchip, he clearly understood that his brain was now equivalent to an extremely large and complex database. What he didn't know was that the blueprints in his mind were things that didn't even exist in the Federal Academy of Sciences database. And these pictures weren't left in the chip by Uncle, but by a great existence of data. In order to wake him up from his coma, it used the second type of communication method. What he didn't know was that he was the fugitive with the best luck in the universe. Chapter 155. The reason why Su Lu had always assumed that the dark dream, as well as the series of images that appeared on his retina, was something that Uncle Feng Yu had left in the chip, and did not think in any other direction, was because of the inertia of human thought. Since Su Lu knew that there was a problem with the chip, naturally, when a strange situation occurred, he would think in that direction. Naturally, He would not have thought that it was the glory of the charter of human society that had created such a miraculous outcome. This was because he had always thought that as long as the Bureau of Proclamation discovered the problem with his chip, then what awaited him would be the end of the road as a fugitive. For Su Lo, the more convincing evidence was actually the various pictures of beautiful women mixed in with those images. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Other than that lecherous uncle who frequented the sanatorium for prostitutes, who else would use such cutting-edge technology to seal these useless pornographic images into the chip and store them in his mind? Su Li's lips curled into a bitter smile, and he muttered to himself, "This lecherous fellow, should I call you Feng Yu or Professor Jean? How many identities did you actually have in the past?" Pursued by the federal military in the Donglin region, replaced with a brand new chip in the suburbs of Hushi region, followed the method left by Uncle Feng Yu to leave the planet full of mining pits, entered Yua University with a recommendation letter of unknown content, accidentally entered Section H1 of the library in Section H, and met Tai Ziyuan from there. The mysterious power in his body, the faint connection between this power and the ice-cold metal mecha, the dark dream after he had fainted, the scenes in the dream link after link. Until today, Su Lu was very confident that all of this was related to Feng Yu. At least, some of the links were definitely the result of someone's deliberate arrangement. He did not know whether this arrangement was good or bad, but at least he knew that he was still alive. The other side of being alive was that he already knew that he was no longer an ordinary person, and naturally could not expect to live the life of an ordinary person. On his left hand was an inconspicuous metal bracelet. Su Lu narrowed his eyes as he looked at the bracelet, thinking about the chip inside that was as bright as a star. He had also thought about whether he should try out all the chips in the bracelet to see the identity and life that those chips represented. However, the pain of replacing the chips made his heart palpitate. He was also worried that this kind of unnecessary action would trigger the glory of the charter, so he never took the risk. Instead, he took it slowly according to his character. There was also a thought that was deeply rooted in his heart that prevented him from using the rest of the chips in the bracelet for the time being. In his conjecture, before Uncle Feng Yu came to the Eastwood region, he must have been like a mysterious ghost with 3,000 incarnations, floating in the starry sky of the Federation and traveling the world. And this kind of life that was destined to be impossible to stay in one place for a long time, destined to be separated from the people and things around him, was not what Su Lu wanted. With a slight movement of his left hand, the car slowly started. With a low and pleasant sound, it drove out of the underground parking lot like a ghost. A very ordinary black car without obvious signs was driving on the streets of the capital special district. Su Lu looked at the street beside the car expressionlessly, trying to get away from the prompts of the electronic map as soon as possible and familiarize himself with the streets and alleys of the capital. Another important reason for choosing the Research Institute instead of the Engineering Department was that the Nutshell Engineering Department was in Harbor City, and the Research Institute was in the Capital Special District. The final battlefield of the upcoming presidential election would definitely be in the Capital Special District. He would definitely stay on the battlefield to see what would happen to the counselor named Macklin. Su Lu never thought that Tai Ziyuan owed him anything, and he was very clear that big shots at that level, even if they respected friendship, could still give up anything in the face of family interest. He could not put all his hopes on that distant friend of his. He had to watch in person. If everything did not go as he wished in the future, perhaps he would do something himself. At least Tai Ziyuan had given him a car that he really wanted. In the snowstorm of Linhai, he had followed Shi Qinghai to escape the pursuit of the Federation Investigation Bureau. The experience of running wildly on that stretch of road had deeply affected Su Lu. The first time he had driven a car, and he had driven so crazily. That kind of thrill, that kind of nervousness and excitement, and that feeling of perfect unity between man and machine, all made Sulu fall in love with driving. This was very similar to the feeling of operating a mecha, but it was more direct, so the thrill was even more intense. Even so, the black car driving on the streets of the capital at this time was exceptionally stable, maintaining a speed of around 70 kilometers per hour. This was due to his personality. In front of the public, Sulu was still that somewhat stuffy, somewhat wooden fellow. The capital special district did not occupy a large area, but it gathered all of the important government departments of the Human Federation, as well as the various administrative agencies under the Management Committee. In addition to those large corporate headquarters that spanned across several star systems, there was not much extra land left. Thus, the cost of living in the special district was rather high. Until today, other than those high-class residential districts that belonged to the Federation government, there was no other residential district that could be formed. Most Federation citizens living in the capital would live in the 7 satellite cities within a radius of 100 kilometers or so of the capital special district. The apartment that Sulu had rented in advance was in City 2. After bypassing the traffic, the black car silently and steadily got onto Highway 2. It began to speed up without anyone noticing. Perhaps the car's stability was too strong, or perhaps the driver's ability was too good, but despite gradually exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, there was no sense of high speed. Soothing music began to play, and Sulu pressed the touchscreen to call up the car's computer system. He began to drive the car while diligently learning about the relevant aspects of the car. During the assassination in the Linhai State underground parking lot, the incomparably strong anti-attack capabilities of this black car had left an extremely deep impression on Sulu. He knew that this car was definitely not as simple as it looked on the outside. It was just that after receiving the car at the capital airport, he had not had much time to study it, so he did not know what other remarkable aspects of the car's craftsmanship were. Just as Sulu was engrossed in his thoughts, the car's computer suddenly beeped with an alarm. Beep, beep, dangerous vehicle approaching. Sulu's nerves suddenly tightened, but before he had time to react, he only saw an extremely bright red shadow on his left. With a whoosh, it overtook the car, leaving behind only a strong gust of wind. The alarm was lifted, and Sulu silently watched the red sports car leave, leaving behind a trail of dust. He recognized that it was one of the Federation's top luxury cars, the Lotus, and the Red Lotus was the most eye-catching and expensive of these luxury cars. The reason why it was expensive was because the Red Lotus did not use clean energy, nor did it use hybrid power, but instead used an old-fashioned gasoline engine. Although it was old-fashioned, its power output was much higher than that of an electric car or a hybrid power car. Judging with the naked eye, Sulu determined that the Red Lotus was going at least 200 kilometers per hour when it overtook him. The capital special region was filled with high-ranking officials, and naturally there was also a group of young people with special privileges. These rich young people did not need to serve in the military, and had nothing to do all day long, so they could only look for supplements in the spiritual world. Some people might bury themselves in books, some would sink into the sea of lust, some would explore everywhere, but most people still chose to look for all kinds of excitement. Drag racing was, without a doubt, the most historical and most popular kind of activity. After all, this was the capital special region. Countless powers and countless media outlets had their eyes on this place. These descendants of influential people were relatively restrained, but in the other provinces, these descendants of influential people were even more arrogant. Sulu had also heard that these descendants of influential people in the capital special region were not very willing to drag race on the streets of the special region, because it could easily cause trouble for their parents. Moreover, there were too many high-ranking officials in the special region, so who knew what kind of trouble they could not afford to provoke. These descendants of influential people mostly chose to drag race on the roads leading out of the city, especially the highways leading to several satellite cities, as well as the inner streets of the satellite cities. Sulu did not expect that he would encounter a drag racer just a few days after arriving in the capital's special region. Being overtaken by the Red Lotus in a dangerous and provocative manner, Sulu's mood did not change in the slightest. Different from his age, he had already experienced too many things, so naturally he was not that easily angered, nor was he that competitive. Just like the black car he was driving at this time, keeping it to himself was a common trait of their personalities. Sulu did not have the impulse to cause trouble, but trouble took the initiative to find him. He watched as the figure of the Red Lotus slowed down and gradually became clearer. His eyes gradually narrowed. The other party had slowed down, so they must be waiting for something. He could only hope that it was not waiting for his unremarkable black car. However, what made him feel somewhat helpless was that the Red Lotus's target was him. Especially when he reduced the speed to 30 kilometers per hour, which was already exceeding the speed limit of the highway, the Red Lotus still did not leave because of his retreat. Instead, it also reduced its speed. In the end, this Red Lotus shockingly braked directly and abruptly stopped in front of Sulu, firmly blocking the black car's path. Sulu frowned slightly, not understanding what was going on. A girl came down from the Red Lotus and walked directly in front of the black car, looking over coldly. In the chilly weather of early spring, this girl wore a short red windbreaker. The windbreaker reached her knees, revealing a pair of seductive legs. The girl coldly looked at the black car, but her gaze gradually turned cold and even somewhat despairing. Tears gushed out, turning the heavy makeup on her eyes into 2 lines of black rain. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.